Welcome to Savage Harry. Today's adventure. What if Dexter Morgan found Harry and taught him that Death Eaters were just special code subjects? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The cupboard under the stairs. The Miami air at 4 in the morning tasted of salt and overripe mango, and the man on the table tasted, by every visible measure, like he had been very afraid for a very long time. Dexter Morgan registered both data points with the same neutral attention he might have given a glass slide in his office at Miami Metro. Outside, a refrigerator unit hummed. Inside the small warehouse on the wrong side of Doral, the only other sound was the slow, patient breathing of the bound man. Avery Travers was 41, English, white blonde, expensive teeth. The forearm marking had photographed badly under the worklight. The skull and snake puckered into the same gray scar tissue as the 4 other forearms that had filtered into Florida that year. 5 forearms, 5 slides. Look at me. A collector, Dexter thought, the line of his mouth not quite moving. He had spent 3 months on Travers. 3 months of municipal records and phone taps, and one perfectly chaste lunch with a girl at the British consulate who had been told, in the friendliest possible voice, that her ex-boyfriend was suspected of laundering. Travers had murdered a muggle named Inez Ruiz in March. He had murdered Inez's daughter Anna, 14, in May. He had also, last week, murdered an immigration officer named Davies who had asked the wrong question about the wrong paperwork. Travers's confession ran like clockwork once the rib was broken. He listed the bodies on his own, almost relieved. Dexter had Harry Morgan in his head. The code, son. Only the deserving. Verification before everything. The voice of his adoptive father had not aged. It still wore short sleeves and smelled faintly of Old Spice. The boy. Travers's voice had gone soft, the way men's voices did at this hour. The tape gave him just enough mouth movement. Dexter set the scalpel down beside the cheek-slide tray and waited. "There is a boy in Surrey," Travers said. "He marked him, the Dark Lord marked him. He should be dead, and he is not dead. Find him. Look in Surrey, Privet, find him before they do. He is 6. He is 6 now. 6. Dexter heard the click in his own head before he heard it in the room. The mathematical click of a piece of evidence dropping into a sorted column. Travers's pupils were enormous. The man had been 12 hours on this table and was still trying to barter for the boy. That by itself was data. A man like Travers did not protect children. "What does he look like?" Dexter said. "Black hair, a scar on his forehead, a lightning. He survived the killing curse. He survived. He is the Dark Lord's only failure. He carries." Travers stopped. His jaw worked. "He carries what, Avery?" Travers met Dexter's eye for the first time in 5 hours, and Dexter saw something there that he had not, until that night, seen on a subject's face. He saw recognition. "He carries what I carry," Travers said. "What you carry." For a long, even count of 3, Dexter held the man's gaze. Then he picked up the scalpel and finished, neatly, what he had begun. By dawn the table was clean and Travers was 38 separate parcels at the bottom of the Gulf Stream, weighted with the kind of brick Dexter kept stockpiled in the warehouse for the kind of evening that needed them. The slide, a single cheek prick on a glass square, labeled in his careful hand AVRYT, went into the rosewood box on the lower shelf of his apartment air conditioner. 5 forearms, 5 slides. He poured himself coffee and read, in the Miami Herald, that Davies, the immigration officer's funeral, would be Thursday and the city was very sorry. Surrey. He sat at his kitchen table and wrote the word on a yellow pad. Under it he wrote, 6 years old. Lightning scar, black hair, Privet. He had a list of 7 names from Travers's house and 2 more from the warehouse Travers had run his magical exchange program out of. He had a small black book in a tin behind the warehouse stove that contained, in a careful hand, the names and addresses of 12 people in Britain, 6 in Florida, 3 in Argentina. The book had a column for status. Some of the names were ticked, some were ringed. 2 had a small mark beside them that Dexter, who read 4 languages and could not read this one, had recognized after a long time as a rune. He photocopied the book with the warehouse's photocopier. He left the original where Travers had hidden it. He walked the 5 blocks back to his car in the gray Miami pre-dawn and tasted, for the first time in 11 years of doing this work, something that was not satisfaction and was not boredom and was not the steady old hum of something owed and paid. He tasted appetite. He tasted unfinished. A boy in a cupboard, Harry's voice said gently in his head, "Be careful, son. That is how you were made." He spent the weekend on the photocopies. The black book was, after the 3rd pass, a careful piece of work. Whoever had written it, and the writing was Travers's, although Travers had not, in his 12 hours on the table, mentioned the book, had taken the trouble to develop a small private cipher for the column labeled Status. Dexter, who had cracked 12 such ciphers in 19 years at Miami Metro, cracked this one over the course of a Sunday afternoon with a yellow pad, a packet of pencils, and the second pot of coffee. The cipher was, in the end, an alphabetic substitution that began on a different letter in each line. The offset was the first letter of the subject's surname. He had it broken by 4. By 5 he had names. By 6 he had a small headache. By 7 he had a sense of the geography. The geography was unkind. Of the 12 British names, 6 were in London proper, 3 were in Wiltshire, 2 were in Scotland, and 1 was, by a small marginal annotation he was unsure how to parse, in residence at the school. The school was not named. He did not, on the first pass, attempt to identify the school. He set the line in the column on the right of his yellow pad and moved on. The Florida names were, by contrast, easy. He had Travers's address book in the same box. He had Travers's customs file under 3 names. He had a list of 7 property records under one of the 3 names, of which 3 matched drop-offs Dexter had been quietly mapping since the previous March. He sat with the list at his kitchen table at 9:30 on Sunday night and felt, for the first time in 11 years, the small specific tilt of a piece of work that was about to triple in size. He thought briefly of declining it. He thought of telling himself that The Boy in Surrey was a story, that Travers had been hallucinating at 12 hours on the table, that the proper course was to mail the photocopies anonymously to MI5 and let the British get to a Surrey hallway carpet in their own time. He thought also of Harry Morgan at the hospital bed in 1973, the soft contractionless voice, the careful list of things a careful man passed to his son. The voice in his head said quietly, "You do not get to opt out of a child, son." The voice in his head had not in 18 years been wrong. He went to bed. In the morning he booked the flight. He flew on the Tuesday. He told Rita he had a conference in Atlanta. He told Lagerta nothing because Lagerta had not asked. He landed at Heathrow on Wednesday morning, hired a small Vauxhall with cash and a name that was not his, and was outside for Privet Drive by lunchtime. The street offered him exactly what its name promised: hedges in identical octagons, cars washed on Saturdays, lawns that confessed nothing. Number 4 had a white door and net curtains and a Vauxhall Cavalier in the drive and an immaculate front step. A petunia bed bordered the gravel. A second-floor window held the silhouette of a large, motionless woman who watched the street with what Dexter, after 38 years of observing humans, could identify only as the steady, patient avarice of a person watching for something she could resent. He parked at the end of the road by a phone box and watched until 5. He had brought, in the back of the Vauxhall, a small plastic Tesco bag of equipment he had purchased in cash on the way out of Heathrow. The bag contained, in order, a spiral-bound A5 notepad in green, a clutch of HB pencils, a pair of cheap birdwatching binoculars, a thermos of strong coffee bought at the airport Costa, 2 bananas, 3 packets of plain salted crisps, a child-sized handkerchief he had picked up at the airport newsagent on the same instinct that had made him buy the color-coded plastic chips at the yard sale 18 months later, and a copy of the Daily Telegraph that he opened to the cricket pages and held in front of his face whenever. In the course of 9 hours of watching, a car or a pedestrian came along the road and slowed. He took notes in green. The first time the front door of number 4 opened at 9:20, the second-floor woman, Petunia, he had her now, came out with a duster and beat it 3 times against the brick. The notebook said, P. Front door 921. Beats duster 3 times. Returns. Pattern, domestic. At 12:15 she came out again with a small white plastic basket and pegged out a line of children's clothes on the rotary in the side garden. He counted the clothes through the binoculars. There were 13 items. 11 were sized for a small chubby boy of 7, 2 were for a child a year younger and a great deal thinner. The thinner clothes were folded smaller and pegged in the corner. The notebook said 1217. Line. 11 items for D, 2 items for second child. Second child's items pegged separately. He felt on the third entry the small certain interior bell. The bell was the bell. The bell was, he had learned over 11 years, the careful thing that did most of his good work in advance of his hands. He let the bell speak. He did not act on it. He made another entry. He watched the line move in the small autumn breeze. 11 items in a row, 2 items in the corner. At 5 the woman on the second floor went down. The front door opened at 5:15, and a man came out, Vernon Dursley, by the records, and shouted at nothing in particular for 10 seconds and got into the Cavalier and reversed off the drive. At 5:20 the front door opened again, and a thin, hawk-faced woman set out a milk bottle and shrieked something into the house and slammed the door. At no point did a small boy with black hair leave or enter the house. Dexter watched until 11 that night. He saw the lights go off room by room. The smallest bedroom on the upper floor was the brightest, the longest. Toys, the back of a chubby blonde head, a television. The other small space, the cupboard under the stairs, visible only as the dim shape of a slatted door behind the frosted hallway pane, did not light at all, ever, not once, in 9 hours of observation. But twice the cupboard door briefly shifted on its hinge, as though someone inside it had moved and the wood had answered the movement. That, Dexter thought, is where they keep him. He drove to a Travelodge in Slough. He slept 3 hours. He drank petrol station coffee and ate a sausage roll he did not taste, and at 4:30 on Thursday morning he was back outside number 4 with a roll of duct tape, a set of lockpicks, a chloroform pad in a sealed bag, and the lightest of his 3 knives. He did not need the chloroform. He did not need the knife. He picked the back door at 4:46. The kitchen smelled of bacon grease and bleach. The cupboard door, when he set his ear to it, gave him the small, even breathing of a child who had taught itself to sleep without dreaming. He picked the cupboard lock, a tin slide latch a man had screwed onto the outside of a cupboard that held a 6-year-old in 11 seconds. He let the door open on its own weight. Into the hall light he had not switched on. He saw a mattress the size of a tea towel, a blanket, a shelf of broken plastic soldiers, a child curled with his back to the door, knees to his chest, in pajamas 2 sizes too large that had once been blue. A scar on the back of the small skull, white in the dimness, a lightning bolt above the right temple badly healed because no one had thought it worth healing. The child's eyes opened. They were green. They did not blink for a long count. Dexter Morgan, who at 4 years old had been pulled out of a shipping container in the same blood and the same flat, unsleeping stillness, who had been raised by a good cop into a careful monster, knelt down on a Surrey hallway carpet at 4:48 in the morning, and did the one thing he had not yet learned how to do. He held out his hand. "Hello, kid," he said, the voice he used for Rita's son Cody when Cody had a nightmare. "I am not going to hurt you. I am going to take you out of this house. Do you want to come with me?" The child considered him, not the way a 6-year-old considers an adult, the way a small animal considers a larger animal that has not yet declared. "Are you," the child said in a voice that had been used too rarely to be a child's voice anymore, "a wizard?" Dexter felt the air in the hallway tilt very slightly, the way air tilted in his own quiet rooms on the slow seconds before a knife went down. Travers had not lied. Travers had not been mad. "He carries what I carry." "No," Dexter said. "I am not a wizard, but I know what you are, and I know who hurt you, and I have stopped 3 of them already this year." The boy held out his hand. His palm was bruised. 3 of his fingernails were chewed to nothing. The pajama sleeve fell back and Dexter saw, on the small forearm, the faint round scar pattern of a cigarette tip. The boy did not cry. The boy did not speak. The boy got up, walked out of the cupboard on bare feet, took Dexter's hand in his own small and surprisingly hot one, and walked out of 4 Privet Drive at 4:53 in the morning while the Dursleys slept the long, complacent sleep of people who had not yet learned that one of the small things in their house had, all along, been watching them back. In the Vauxhall, the boy did not ask where they were going. He did not ask Dexter's name. He sat in the passenger seat with the seat belt across his chest and looked at the empty A4 through the windscreen. After Maidenhead, he said, "There was a man in our garden last week." "What sort of man?" "He had a stick. He said the Dark Lord's name. He said, 'Potter, are you there, little Potter?' and then he saw the Dursleys' light come on and he went away." Dexter did not let his hands tighten on the wheel. "Did you see his face? He had a scar here." The boy tapped his own cheekbone very precisely with the chewed fingernail. Long, white. Avery Travers had a sister, Dexter thought, Mariella. The book had her ringed. He filed the face under to do. He looked across at the boy. The green eyes were watching the road. A child with no questions was a child who had learned that questions cost. Dexter recognized the architecture. He had built the same one out of himself. "What is your name?" he said. "Harry." "Harry, my name is Dexter Morgan. I am a forensic technician with the Miami Police Department. I am also somebody who finds people who hurt other people and stops them from doing it again. Have you ever heard of that kind of person?" "Yes," the boy said. "Where?" "In my head," the boy said. "There is a thing in my head that knows them. It went very loud last week when the man in the garden came." Dexter took a slow breath in through his nose and let it out, even and unhurried, because if he did not he was going to laugh, and the laugh would not be the safe one. "Hello, little brother," he thought. "I have one of those too," he said. "I have had it since I was 4. It is not bad. It is a very useful thing if you teach it to be." Harry, for the first time, looked across at him. The green eyes flickered very faintly with what Dexter recognized with the calm of a man who had spent a career labeling the unrecognized as interest. "Are you going to teach me?" Harry said. "Yes," Dexter said. "Yes, I am." They drove west until Reading. He pulled into a little chef and bought Harry a sausage and 3 slices of toast and a glass of milk, and watched the boy eat them with the careful, ration-stretching slowness of a child who had been hungry his whole short life. He bought Harry a packet of crisps and a Yorkie bar for the back seat. He bought a Birmingham telephone directory and an OS map. He went into the toilets and held a public phone receiver between shoulder and ear and called a number in Surfside, Miami, that belonged to a woman named Rosa who owed Harry Morgan a long and uncomplicated favor from 1979. And Rosa, who had not heard his voice in 7 years, said, "Whatever it is, Dexter, yes." He drove to Birmingham. He left the Vauxhall in long stay. He paid cash for 2 tickets to Dublin under the name of a man who had died in Coral Gables in 1983, and a child whose name on the paperwork was Harry James Morgan, age 6, son. He boarded a 9 p.m. ferry. He boarded, 18 hours later, a Boeing 747 from Shannon to Miami, and the small boy sat beside him with a coloring book purchased at Shannon duty-free, and did not, in 7 hours of flight, ask a single further question. Once halfway across the Atlantic, Harry put down the crayon and said, "There were two of them. The Dursleys hurt me, but there was a thing in my head that also hurt me, when I was small. It went quiet about a year ago." What kind of quiet? Like it was tired, like it was busy somewhere else. Dexter, who had read the line "he should be dead and he is not dead" into the small black book for the last 3 days, picked up the boy's hand, the one with the cigarette burns, and held it on the airline tray. "Kid," he said softly, the casual ease of the word arriving without surprise, "I think you and I have a lot of work to do." In a high tower in Scotland, on the night Dexter Morgan took Harry Potter out of his cupboard, Albus Dumbledore stood at a window watching the spires of his school in the small, cold rain, and did not yet know that one of the figures in his ledger had moved. He would not, in fact, know it for 5.5 years, by which time the figure on the ledger would have moved farther and harder and more permanently than Dumbledore, in any of his most uneasy nights at this window, would have been able to imagine. He stood at the window. He drank his cocoa. He did not look at Surrey on his map. In a low house in Spinner's End, Severus Snape, who had taken to opening Lily Potter's son's name on a charmed locator twice a year in the small private hour after dawn, opened it that morning and saw the locator give him, for the first time, the spreading silver fog of out of British range. He did not move. He drank his coffee. He set the locator down very carefully, and he looked at the dawn in his small garden, and he thought, in the cold, accurate, contractionless interior voice of a man who had once been someone's friend, "Someone has done a thing. I will know in time what." He did not that morning raise an alarm. He waited. The Vauxhall sat in Birmingham Longstay for 11 days before a parking warden ticketed it, and another 8 before a different warden noticed it had not moved. By the time the British police ran the plates and found that the renter had given an address in Brighton that did not exist, Dexter Morgan and a small black-haired boy were in a stilted clapboard safehouse 2 streets back from the Indian Creek in Miami Beach. And the boy was eating real eggs at a real kitchen table for the first time in his small life. And the boy was watching, across the table, the careful, steady hands of a man who had laid out, on a sheet of butcher paper, 11 black and white photographs of 11 adult faces. "These are the ones I know about," Dexter said. The boy chewed his eggs. The boy looked very seriously at the photographs. "This one," Harry said, "of Mariella Travers. She was the one in our garden, the scar, there." "Are you sure, kid?" "Yes." Dexter took a red Sharpie from the drawer. He drew, very carefully, a small red circle around Mariella Travers's face on the butcher paper. He set the Sharpie down and looked across at the boy, and the boy, his small mouth full of eggs, looked back. And in that look, across the formica, across the eggs, across the 11 photographs and the ocean and the cupboard and the long unspoken thing, a piece of work was begun that the wizarding world, all 6 of its principals and 47 of its functionaries, would not be in any way prepared for 8 years later, when the boy on the other side of the eggs walked back into Britain, age 14, with a notebook in his trunk and a small, careful knife wrapped in oilcloth, and finished it. The boy did not name what he felt. He named only what he saw: 11 faces, 1 red circle, a red Sharpie warm from the hand of the man across the table. Outside the kitchen window, the Atlantic moved against pilings in the broad, even slap of a tide that did not care, had never cared, what was beginning in the small clapboard kitchen above it. A pelican settled on the seawall and tucked its wings. Inside the kitchen the boy reached, very gravely, across the butcher paper. He took the Sharpie from the man who had taken him out of a cupboard. He uncapped it, in the careful, small-fingered way of a child who had learned the price of a wasted thing. He drew, around the face beside Mariella Travers, a second small red circle, his hand steady on the photograph. "This one too," Harry said. "He came once. He was nicer. He smelled like the man in the garden. They smell like a green stove." Dexter looked at the face. Antonin Dolohov, March 1986, taken at customs in Tampa under the name Anthony Dolan. "All right, kid," Dexter said. "We will start with these two." The boy, very quietly, around a mouthful of egg, said, "All right." It was the first night of his real life. Rosa met them at the airport. She had on a yellow dress and a small pair of gold earrings and the still careful face of a woman who had been told, the previous evening on a phone in Miami, that whatever the favor was, the favor involved a child. She stood at the arrivals gate at Concourse D and watched Dexter walk through with the boy beside him in the small gray coat. She did not, when they reached her, embrace either of them. She knelt down on the airport linoleum in the yellow dress and held out her hand to the child the way Dexter had held out his hand on the Surrey hallway carpet, and she said, in the small, careful Spanish English she used for the people she had decided immediately to love, "I am Rosa. You are very welcome. I have made you a bed." Harry took her hand. He did not, by any visible change of face, react. But he did not, in the next 40 minutes, let her hand go, through baggage claim and the drive down US 1, and the slow turn off Collins onto 74th Street. The small hot palm sat in Rosa's, and Rosa, who at 61 had buried a husband and a sister and an only son in the same 6-year period of her life, did not in any of the 40 minutes look away. The safe house smelled of beans and lavender. Rosa had made the bed in the second bedroom with sheets she had laundered at her duplex the afternoon before. There was a small wooden horse on the pillow that had once belonged to her son. The horse was painted red. Harry sat on the bed, looked at the horse, picked it up with the same small economy with which he picked up everything, and held it in both hands. "Thank you," he said, in the small, grave voice of a person who had not, before that evening, owned anything. "De nada, mijo," Rosa said. She went to the kitchen. Dexter sat down on the edge of the bed beside the boy. He did not speak. He let the wisteria on the porch rail outside the window do the talking, which the wisteria, in its slow, even afternoon way, did. After a long count, Harry said, in the small, grave voice he had used at the airport, "Will the man with the white scar come here?" "No, kid. He will not. I will not let him." "Will he come for me?" "Eventually he will try. He will not find you because I have, with a man I know in California, built you a name and a paper trail going back to a hospital in San Diego in 1985. And you are, on the public record, Harry James Morgan of San Diego, an orphan, my godson, in my custody by court order since the death of your parents in a car accident on Interstate 5 in the autumn of last year. He will, if he comes looking, go to San Diego. He will, in San Diego, find a sealed adoption file he cannot, on any reasonable budget of charms, crack. He will eventually give up. He has, by the count of the photographs on the butcher paper, 26 other things to do. All right. The boy held the wooden horse. He did not, by any further visible signal, react. "Kid, yes. Anything you do not want to do, you do not have to do. Not here, not in this house. Anything you do not want to eat, you do not eat. Anything you do not want to say, you do not say. The agreement between us is that you are here and the latch is gone. All right." The boy laid the wooden horse against his chest. He shut his eyes. He fell asleep in his coat on top of the made bed in 5 seconds, with the small, even untroubled breathing of a child who, for the first time in many months, had been told that a piece of furniture in his life was not coming back. Rosa came to the door at 6. She looked at the sleeping boy. She looked at Dexter. She did not say anything. She put her hand very gently on the doorframe. She went back to the kitchen and put the beans on the stove. Later, on the porch, the boy slept across 2 chair cushions with the small plastic horse Rosa had brought him on the first Sunday clutched in his right hand. Dexter sat in the chair opposite with the photocopies of the black book on his knee, and read, by the small Atlantic moon over the seawall, the line he had not yet in 3 weeks attempted to parse. In residence at the school, he thought of the locator he had not yet built. He thought of the school he had not yet named. He thought, in the small, precise interior cadence Harry Morgan had taught him in 1965, of how to build a curriculum for a child who did not know, yet, that he had been enrolled in one. He thought finally of the 11 names on the butcher paper and of the small, careful red Sharpie circles around 2 of them, and of the slow, patient mathematics by which a man with a list and a boy with the eye would, in time, work through such a list to its end. 11 names, 2 circles, a long, careful curriculum that would, between the porch and the eventual end of the last line, take 8 years. He had 8 years. He turned the page of the photocopy. He kept reading. The wisteria moved on the rail in the small Atlantic breeze, and the boy on the chair cushions slept the long, quiet sleep of a child who, for the first time in his small life, was not behind a latch. He had read, on the flight, a paperback by Bobby Hampton's old pal Larry Felton on the psychology of childhood resilience. The book had been wrong in 9 of its 11 chapters. The book had been correct in 2. The 2 correct chapters had been on the small, unteachable fact that a child of 6 who has lived a long time without comfort does not, on the first night of comfort, know how to receive it. The comfort has to be set down beside him, in small, careful daily quantities, and not pressed upon him, and not, on any account, withdrawn. Dexter, in the small clapboard kitchen at 6:30 on the first night, set down a plate of black beans and rice and a glass of milk beside the boy on the porch, and did not, by any visible signal, ask the boy to eat. The boy ate. He ate in the small, careful, slow way of a child who had not, in 5 years, been given a plate that was not subsequently taken away. He ate it all. He did not, when he was finished, ask for more. Dexter, in the porch chair opposite, took out the photocopies again. He did not look at the boy. He let the boy have the meal. He let the meal be the meal. He sat with the photocopies for 35 minutes, and at the end of the 35 minutes the boy, who had finished long ago, stood up and walked in his 2 large pajamas to the porch rail and reached up. He was small and touched, very gently, the wisteria. He held a single small purple cluster of it between his fingers. He did not pull it. He let it go. He came back to the chair. He sat down. "Sir," he said, is the porch yours?" "It is Rosa's." "It is, from this evening, yours and mine." "All right." The boy looked out at the seawall. The Pelican was, that evening, in residence. The seawall stretched, in the broad, even Atlantic dusk, to the north and to the south, in the gentle curving line of an island that had not been told, by anyone in 1986, that one of the small new children in one of its small clapboard houses was, on the slow, careful project of his whole future life, about to become, by the porch, by the wisteria, by the man in the chair opposite, and by the slow, patient curriculum he was about to be put through, the kind of person the wizarding world had not in any of its long years built itself a name for. He sat with Dexter on the porch until the streetlights came on. He did not speak again until Rosa called them, from the kitchen, into the beans. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The code Rosa was 61 and small and Cuban, and she had been a clerk at Miami Metro Records for 31 years. She owned the safe house on Indian Creek because her husband Mateo had bought it for them in 1968 and then died, very inconveniently, of a coronary in 1979 before he had had time to sell it. The house had 2 bedrooms and a deep porch, and a wisteria that gripped the porch rail like an old woman's hand. Rosa lived 3 streets away in a duplex with a parrot. She came to the safe house on Sundays and brought black beans and stories and asked nothing. For the first 7 weeks she was the only third person in their life. "He needs other children," Rosa said in the kitchen one Sunday in late October while Harry sat at the porch table with a glass of milk and the small bones of his shoulders rounded over a coloring book. "I know," Dexter said. "He needs school. I am putting him in school. After Christmas. I am building him a name first." Rosa looked at him for a long moment. The wisteria moved in a small Atlantic breeze. "You are building him more than a name, Dexter Morgan." "Yes." "Will he be all right?" "He will be more than all right. He will be a careful person. He will be a useful person." She did not ask what useful meant. She did not ask any of the questions she could have asked. She had loved Harry Morgan in the way that women loved decent men they could not have, and she had loved Dexter from the day his father had brought him home with a 1,000-yard stare and a bandage on his face, and she had decided in October 1986 that whatever Dexter was doing to the boy in his porch was something she would, without comment, support. "He calls you Dex," she said. "Yes. He is going to call you something else soon. Probably." She put the lid on her pot. She looked at him. "My condition," she said, "is that you do not break him, train him, do not break him. There is a difference. Mateo trained dogs, he could tell you the difference." "Yes, ma'am," Dexter said. He said it the way he had said it to Harry Morgan at 14. Rosa nodded once. She went back to her duplex. The first lesson was patience. Dexter had not known, on the porch the morning after the Atlantic crossing, how to introduce the lesson, in the event he did not need to. The boy had patience the way other boys had freckles. He could sit, motionless, on the porch swing for 2 hours, watching a pelican on the seawall. He could color for 40 minutes without lifting his head. The patience was not, Dexter quickly learned, the patience of a calm child. It was the patience of a child who had been kept very still for very long stretches in a small wooden space and had learned to make a virtue of the only thing the small space offered him. The patience was inverted survival. The patience was a scar. Dexter took the scar and built around it. The second lesson was sorting. He bought, at a yard sale in Coconut Grove, 240 color-coded plastic chips of the kind used at construction sites. He laid them on the porch table by color, by size, by shape. He taught Harry to sort. He timed him with a kitchen egg timer. He praised him, neutrally, every time he beat the previous time. By Christmas, Harry could sort 240 chips in under a minute. He could also, having watched Dexter do it twice, sort them again by the order in which they had been placed on the table, which Dexter had not asked him to memorize and had not known he had memorized. Dexter, in the kitchen with the Christmas turkey, put down his knife and stood very still for a moment. A useful person, he thought. Eventually a more than useful person. The third lesson was patterns. They went to South Beach on Tuesdays and sat on a bench by the cycle path, and Dexter said, "Count the joggers in green shirts. Then count the times that woman touches her right earlobe in 10 minutes. Then tell me which of the 3 men reading newspapers at the cafe is the only one who has not turned a page in 20 minutes. Harry, every time, got the answer. Harry, by his 7th birthday, was getting the answer before Dexter had finished asking the question. The fourth lesson was the long one. The fourth lesson was the rules. They sat on the porch in March 1988, Harry just 8, with a banana milkshake between them on the rail. "I want to tell you about a man named Harry Morgan," Dexter said. "Like me. Like you, he was my father, not the one who made me, the one who raised me. He was a Miami police officer for 31 years. He was a good man and a careful man. He taught me a set of rules that he called the code. For what? For people like us. People who have something in their head that wants to hurt others. He taught me that if I had to hurt, I should hurt only the ones who had hurt first. Only the ones who would hurt again, only when I was sure. Never the innocent, never get caught, never enjoy it more than the work earns. Harry listened. He drank his milkshake with the careful small economy he drank everything. You hurt people, Harry said. You hurt the men with the marks on their arms. Yes, because they hurt others. Yes, and because if I do not, they will do it again. Harry was silent for a long time. He looked at the wisteria. The man in our garden would have hurt me. Yes, you will hurt him. Eventually, yes. All right. Dexter watched the boy. He felt with the small, careful interior compass he had inherited from Harry Morgan, something move in himself that he did not name. The first rule, he said, never the innocent. Never the innocent. The second rule, verify, be sure, more than sure. Verify. The third rule, never get caught. We are not martyrs. We do this so that we can do it again. Never get caught. The fourth rule, the work is the work. It is not pleasure. It is not revenge. It is a job, a clean, careful, finished job. The job is the job. Good kid. Harry took the last pull of the milkshake. He set the glass down. He looked at Dexter with the green eyes that did not blink as often as a child's eyes should blink. There is a fifth one, he said. Dexter raised an eyebrow. You have not said it, Harry said, but you do it. The fifth rule, always know the name, always know the dates, always know the bodies they made, or it is not justice. It is only a feeling. Dexter, for the second time in a year and a half, set down what was in his hand and did not move for a long moment. Yes, kid, he said. That is the fifth rule. We will write it down. He went into the kitchen. He came back with a leather-bound notebook he had bought 2 months earlier in the hope that someday it would be useful. He set it on the porch table between them. You write, he said. Harry wrote. The notebook was a small brown thing with a green ribbon. By his 9th birthday, Harry had filled 3 pages with the rules and another 72 with target identifiers. By his 10th, he had filled it. Dexter bought him a second. The identifiers were not, Dexter saw this clearly by 1989, what Dexter himself wrote down. Dexter wrote scene notes, forensic notes, the lines of inquiry that would close a verification. Harry wrote something else. Harry wrote, Mariella Travers, born 1949, identifying scar left cheekbone 4 inches, spoke at Avery T's wedding in 1982, per Avery T Journal, P41, confirmed presence Diagon Alley March 1981, per Daily Prophet 4 March 1981 P7, Rosa retrieval, confirmed at the Bones killing 28 October 1981, per inquest transcript P14, sister of the same, 10 years older than the same. He wrote in a column on the right what Dexter had not taught him to write. Did her own killings or only watched? Dolohov by contrast. Confirmed murderer of the McKinnons July 1981 per order of the Phoenix testimony reconstructed by Rosa from public hearings. He left a third column blank. Dexter did not ask what the third column was for. Harry did not yet have a word for it. The third column had something to do with whether the person had, at any point, hesitated, and Harry knew it was important but did not yet know how to weight it. Dexter, reading the notebook one evening over the boy's shoulder, said, Where did you get the Bones inquest transcript? Public library. Rosa got it on microfiche. You read microfiche at 9. You taught me. I taught you to use a microfiche reader. I did not teach you to read an inquest transcript. You taught me to read everything carefully. Dexter rubbed the bridge of his nose and laughed once, the safe laugh, the one with the warmth in it. All right, kid. In the spring of Harry's 10th year, Mariella Travers walked into a small bar in Fort Lauderdale at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. She was the third in Dexter's queue, after a code subject named Reyes who had been finished in February and a code subject named Kowalski who had been finished in late March. She drank a vodka tonic. She left at 12:38. She was in a tarp-lined room of Dexter's at 1:15. Dexter had not let Harry come. Harry had not asked to come. They had agreed on the porch in March of 1988 that Harry would not be in any room until he had turned 11, and Harry, who treated agreements the way other children treated birthday cake, did not press. She talked. She named 2 more names. Dexter wrote them on the cardboard he kept beside the table. When he was finished, he poured himself a small whiskey and sat for a moment beside the cooling thing on the tarp and said aloud to no one, "She is one for you, kid." In the safe house on Indian Creek the next morning, he laid the new names on the porch table beside Harry's notebook. Harry read them, neutrally. He took up the second notebook. He copied them into the relevant pages. He wrote beside one of them with a careful small 10-year-old hand, queried Rosa to confirm location March 1981. How was she? Harry said. She talked. Was she ready? It was, Dexter would later think, the first time he had heard one of his own questions in someone else's mouth. Yes, he said, she was ready. All right. Harry, who had not spoken of his mother once in 3 years, picked up Dexter's coffee cup from the porch table and refilled it from the pot in the kitchen and brought it back and set it down at Dexter's elbow. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the cup. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Dexter, after he had gone back inside, sat on the porch with the coffee and looked at the seawall and felt briefly the only thing he ever named, internally, in the long, careful interior monologue of a man who did not name things, he felt pride. It was the named emotion of that year. He let it. The first school had been the Beach Day School on Collins. Dexter had paid for it in cash, and Rosa had stood as Harry's grandmother at the enrollment desk. Harry had attended for 2.5 years and had not in that time had a single incident, made a single friend, or scored below the 80th percentile on a single examination. The teachers liked him. The teachers also looked, sometimes, into his green eyes during a story time and went quiet for a moment, and then looked away. In September of 1989, Dexter pulled him out and homeschooled him. He taught him algebra at 9. He taught him basic Latin at the same age, because, he said, the wizarding language we are eventually going to deal with has Latin bones. He taught him French because he had read, in one of the books Rosa had ordered through a Coral Gables bookseller who specialized in occult ephemera, that the Beauxbatons Academy was the second strongest in continental Europe and might, in due course, become relevant. He also taught him to box. Bobby Hampton's gym on 5th, 3 afternoons a week, 8 to 11 then when Bobby gave him the look, 4 afternoons. By 10 Harry had hands. By 10.5 he had hands and footwork. He did not have weight, and Dexter, who had built the boy back up from the rationed Surrey body of a 6-year-old, did not push him on weight. He pushed him on speed and angle and what Bobby called the eye. That kid has the eye, Bobby said on the porch in May of 1990, while Harry was on the seawall and out of earshot. I have seen the eye in maybe 4 kids in 22 years. Floyd Patterson had the eye. He just sees them coming before they come. I would put money on him at lightweight at 12 if I thought you would let me. He is going to school in Scotland from next year, Dexter said. Then I would put money on him at lightweight in Scotland. They do not do lightweight in Scotland, Bobby. They will when he gets there. Bobby was joking. Bobby was also not quite joking. Bobby, who had been in 7 kinds of trouble for 38 years and had learned to read men the way other men read newspapers, had watched Harry hit the heavy bag in October and had said, neutrally on the way out, "Where did you find him, Morgan?" "He found me, Bobby." "All right." Bobby never asked again. The Hogwarts letter arrived at the safe house in the last week of June 1991, in a heavy cream envelope with green ink and a wax seal of a coat of arms. The American Postal Service had handled it with the bewildered patience of an institution that had decided long ago to forward strange mail rather than examine it. The address read, Mr. H. Morgan Potter, the Indian Creek Safe House, North Bedroom Front, 74th Street and Indian Creek, Miami Beach. FL 33141. Dexter read the address twice. He set the envelope on the porch table. He poured Harry a glass of milk. "They know exactly where you sleep," he said. "Yes. They have known for some time. Yes. That is a problem we will address." "All right." The boy opened the letter. He read it once. He set it on the porch rail. He looked across at Dexter. "I want to go," he said. "I know. They are mostly there. I know. And the school is also the school. I have read about it. It is real. The teachers are real. The library is real. Yes. I will be 11. The agreement was 11. Yes. I want to go," Harry said again. And then in a voice he very rarely used, the 11-year-old voice of an actual 11-year-old, "I will miss you." Dexter took a slow breath. He let it out. "Kid," he said, "you will not miss me as much as I am going to miss you. We will fix the not being there with letters. Owls, if I can build a Miami address that will accept them. With a charm-resistant courier if I cannot. I will not be more than a week from you in any direction. You will come back here every summer, and in the summer you will train, and in the term you will study and you will watch, and you will not begin a single piece of work before September. Before September of what year? Of the year that you and I agree by post that you are ready. All right. Verify, kid, verify. Never the innocent, never the innocent. Never get caught, never get caught. Always know the name, always know the name. And one more, kid, a new one. Listen carefully." Harry's eyes did not blink. "If at any point," Dexter said, "you find yourself on the verge of beginning a piece of work because it is convenient and not because it is just, you stand down, you walk out, you write me, and you do not return to that work until I have read what you have written and replied, even if it costs you the target, even if you lose them, even if they get away. Do you understand? Yes. That is the rule that costs you, Harry. The others are the cheap ones. That is the one with the price." "I understand." "Good." They spent 6 months on Hogwarts. Dexter cashed in 3 favors and bought, through a man named Levin in Lisbon, the complete first-year set of textbooks. Harry read them all by August. He read the 7-year curriculum survey by September. He sat on the porch with the books and a yellow pad and made notes on which spells, if executed correctly, could be repurposed for forensic concealment, which potions, brewed at home, could substitute for the chloroform pad in the small leather kit Dexter had packed for him, which counter curses would matter if Voldemort's faction caught a young code keeper in Hogsmeade. In October, Rosa, who had not in 5 years contributed a single word about wizards because she had decided wizards were Dexter's department, produced, from a drawer in her duplex, a 50-year-old envelope of newspaper clippings she had inherited from her cousin in Madrid. The cousin had been a squib, had been disinherited at 16, had subsequently kept a private file on European magical politics out of, Rosa said, spite. The clippings ran from 1939 to 1973. Many of them concerned a young man named Tom Riddle, who had been at one point a Hogwarts student and had subsequently disappeared, and several concerned the rise and fall of an organization called the Knights of Walpurgis. Harry sat at Rosa's kitchen table and read the file in one sitting and did not eat his sopa. When he came home, he sat on the porch and wrote, in the second notebook, on a clean page, in a careful 11-year-old hand, 3 lines. 1. Riddle Tom, Slytherin, Lever, June 1945. Identifying ring, Gaunt, confirmed at Berks, August 1947. Disappeared Albania, c. 1955. Re-emerged as the Dark Lord, c. 1972. Pettigrew Peter, Gryffindor, Lever, 1978. Confirmed in Avery Teese Journal as the betrayer of the Potters, the parents, James and Lily. 3. End the second one first. Slowest mover, cheapest. He set the notebook down. He looked at Dexter across the porch. Eventually, Harry said, "Not yet, the second one first. The first one when I can." "All right, kid," Dexter said. He left for Britain on the 2nd of November in the year 1991. 2 months later than the rest of his year cohort. After a private arrangement Dexter had arranged through a sympathetic French liaison at the Ministry of Magic's North American attaché, and £3,000 in unmarked notes through a Genevan account. The letter to the school explained that Mr. Morgan Potter had been suffering from an extended bout of dengue. The school had replied in green ink that it would be delighted to welcome him at his convenience. He carried a trunk. He carried in the lining of the trunk the small leather kit with the 3 knives. He carried the second notebook in an inner pocket against his ribs. He carried, in a smaller envelope, the address of the Surrey side house Dexter had quietly purchased in May, in case ever he should need to disappear from Hogwarts inside a single afternoon. At the airport, Dexter Morgan, who had never knelt to a person and never embraced one in a public place, knelt on the linoleum at Gate 17 of Miami International and put both hands on the boy's shoulders. "My son," he said. The first time he had used the word out loud, it came out evenly without surprise the way verified things came out. "I know," Harry said. "Be careful. Verify, never the innocent. I know. Write me." "Yes, I will be here. I am always going to be here." "I know." Dexter let him go. The boy walked through the gate without looking back. He had been taught by a careful man not to look back because looking back at airports was the small public ritual by which men with the wrong kind of head betrayed themselves to passing customs officers. He walked straight. He walked into the jetway. He was gone. Dexter Morgan stood for 37 seconds at Gate 17 with his hands in his coat pockets, and the boarding pass receipt in his right palm folded into a small, precise square. And then he turned, and he walked out of Miami International, and he drove home to the Indian Creek safe house, where on the porch table he found the leather notebook open at the rules page, weighted by a sea-glass paperweight, and a small note in an 11-year-old hand. "I will be back in June." He sat on the porch for a long time. The wisteria moved. He did not name what he felt. He had agreed with himself decades ago not to. But the boy he had taken out of a cupboard in Surrey was, that evening, in the air over the Atlantic on his way to a Scottish castle, with a notebook of 23 names against his ribs and a leather kit in the lining of his trunk. And the boy was 11, and the boy was ready. And the man on the porch, who had been built by his own careful father into a careful monster, let himself, in the safety of the porch and the wisteria, smile the small, even smile of a craftsman whose finest piece had just left the workshop. The first 3 months had been the slow months. Harry had not, in those months, asked a single question that Dexter had not already, in some prior conversation, answered. Harry had eaten 3 meals a day at the kitchen table and 1 meal, on Sundays, at Rose's duplex 3 streets away. Harry had slept every night on the made bed in the second bedroom, with the small wooden horse on the pillow. Harry had bathed without complaint, dressed without complaint, walked the seawall in the late afternoons without complaint, and spoken, on average, between 4 and 7 sentences a day, all of them careful and short. In the 4th week Dexter had begun, very quietly, to time things. He had timed how long it took the boy to drink a glass of milk. He had timed how long it took the boy to put on his shoes. He had timed, on the 3rd Tuesday, how long it took the boy to walk from the kitchen door to the seawall and back. The boy had done it, on the first attempt, in 3 minutes and 11 seconds, which was, by every running measure Dexter had used on himself at the same age, fast. He had not, in the first 3 months, taught the boy a single skill. He had, in the first 3 months, watched. Bobby Hampton was the second outsider. Dexter had brought the boy to the gym for the first time in February, mostly because the safe house was beginning, by small visible signs, to feel small. The boy had stood inside the door of Bobby's gym for the first 3 minutes with his hands in his pockets and his small green eyes on the heavy bag, and had said nothing. The heavy bag had been being hit, at the time, by a 15-year-old named Marisol who had won a regional title the previous fall and was, on the Tuesday in question, the only female fighter in the building. Marisol had finished her 3-minute round. She had toweled off. She had walked across the gym to the bench by the door, and she had crouched down on her heels in front of the boy and looked at him and said, in the small, careful Spanish English of a teenager who had been raised in part by an older sister who taught preschool, "Hi, little brother. You here to box?" The boy had looked at her. He had said in the small, grave voice he had been using on Rose's beans for 10 weeks, "I am not yet. I am here to watch." "All right," Marisol had said. "You watch." She had stood up. She had gone back to the heavy bag. The boy had stood in the doorway for 55 minutes. He had not moved. Bobby had walked over to Dexter at the back wall around the 3rd round and had said very quietly, "Where did he come from?" "England." "Where did he come from before that?" "Wherever it is, Bobby, that the ones with the eye come from." "All right, Morgan. He needs to start with the heavy bag and footwork, not sparring, not yet. Bring him in 3 afternoons a week. We will see in 8 weeks what we have." In 8 weeks they had, by Bobby's small, accurate accounting, a 60-pound boy with hands and feet. By 8 months they had a 60-pound boy with hands, feet, and the eye. By a year they had a 60-pound boy who could, on the heavy bag in a 3-minute round, hit a precise 4-corner pattern at the speed of a moderately competent welterweight twice his age. Bobby had stopped, sometime in the autumn of 1988, asking where the boy had come from. Bobby, on a porch evening at Rose's duplex in December of 1988, with 2 beers and a Cuban sandwich each, had said only, "I have decided, Morgan, to keep my questions in the column to the right." "Good plan, Bobby. You see I do not, on any of the public records, train him." "I see, Bobby. And the small private records that I do keep are nobody else's on this island business." "Correct, Bobby." "All right." They had drunk the beers. In the spring of 1989, the second name on the Florida list, a man named Reyes who had moved into a small bungalow in Hialeah under a false Argentinian passport, was finished in a tarp-lined garage 3 blocks back from the Tamiami. Harry, on the porch the following morning, was given the news in the small, careful, neutral cadence Dexter had used since the previous summer. Harry, at 9.5, took the news with the small, neutral nod of a child who had been preparing, all winter, for the news. He took from his second notebook the page on Reyes and he drew in the bottom right corner a small, careful red tick. "Was he ready?" Harry said. "He was ready." "Did he talk?" "He talked a little, mostly about a man in Lisbon." "A new name, a new name. I have written it down. I will give you the page after breakfast." "All right." Harry, in the small, even cadence of a Tuesday morning, ate his eggs. The Kowalski kill in March was, in every way, the same. By the autumn of 1989, the Florida list was, in Dexter's small, careful accounting, down to 2. The second-to-last name on it was Mariella Travers. Mariella had taken, since her flight from Surrey in the autumn of 1986, 3 years to settle into a small rented bungalow in Fort Lauderdale, under the second name of Ann Travis. She had taken, in those 3 years, a small office job at a Broward County legal practice. She had been careful. She had been, by Dexter's own accounting, more careful than her brother. She had attended, in March of 1990, after a long, careful period of surveillance, a small bar on Las Olas Boulevard at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. She had drunk a vodka tonic. She had left at 12:38. She had been in a tarp-lined room of Dexter's at 1:15. Harry, on the porch the next morning, had taken the new names. He had taken the second notebook. He had drawn the second careful red tick. He had asked that morning the question that had not previously in Dexter's interior accounting occurred to him. Dad. It was the first time he had used the word. Dexter, with the coffee pot in his hand, did not by any visible signal react. He poured the coffee. He sat down opposite the boy. He waited. "Dad," Harry said, "I want to come on the next one. I want to watch, not to do, only to watch. I want to see what the room is. I want to know what you do that you have since November not let me see. I am 10. Dexter took a slow, even breath through his nose. He let it out. "Kid," he said, "the agreement was 11. I know, the agreement was the agreement. I know, but I want to ask. I want the asking to be on the record. I will not, if you say no, ask again until I am 11. I will not press." "All right, I have heard the asking. The answer today is number the answer at 11 on a name you and I have together verified may be yes. We will in a year revisit." "All right." The boy ate his eggs. He did not ask again. In the spring of 1991, on a name they had together verified, a man in Tampa named Mulciber the Elder, the first one on the British list whom the magical exchange program had quietly returned to Florida for a 6-month resupply visit, Harry, 11 years and 2 months old, stood at the back of a tarp-lined room in a warehouse near the port of Tampa and watched, in the small grave silence of a child being shown, for the first time, what his father did. He did not speak. He did not move. He did not, at any point in the 73 minutes of the work, look away. At the end of the work he said, in the small, even voice he had been using since 6, "Dad." "Yes. The 5th rule is the heaviest one. Heavier than you on the porch in 1988 thought it was. Why? Because it is the rule that keeps the work from being only the work. I see now why you wrote it last. I see why Harry Morgan wrote it for you last. You are not in this room the same man as the man on the porch. You are the same man only because of the 5th rule." Dexter, in the small, careful interior cadence of a man whose son had, in the back of a tarp-lined warehouse at the age of 11, named the thing he had not himself, in 20 years of doing the work, named, set the cleaning cloth down on the steel table and walked across the room and put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, kid," he said. "Yes." That night Harry slept the long, even sleep of a child whose curriculum was, on the small, careful accounting of the porch, one whole semester closer to its end. In the morning he ate his eggs. He wrote the date in the second notebook beside the Tampa name. He wrote in the column on the right the word, "present." He underlined it. He capped the quill. Rosa, on the porch on the evening before Harry left for Britain, sat in the small wicker chair across from the 11-year-old who had been, since the autumn of 1986, the closest thing she had to a grandson. She did not speak for a long time. She drank her cold coffee. She watched the wisteria. After a long, careful count, she said, in the small Spanish English she used for the people she had decided to love, "Me. I have a small thing for you to take with you." She held out in her small, careful hand a folded square of yellow embroidered cloth. He took it. He unfolded it. Inside was a small silver medal, the size of a fingernail on a thin silver chain. The medal was very old. The medal had on its face the small worn figure of Santa Marta de Dios, the patron saint of the people whom Rosa had once, in a long, careful conversation with Dexter at the kitchen table in 1987, called Los que cuidan a los niños que el mundo no cuido. "It was my son's," she said. "He did not get to be 11. He was 9 when the polio took him. He would, I think, very much like for you to have it." Harry held the medal in both hands. He looked at Rosa. He did not, by any visible signal, react. He stood up very neatly from the porch chair. He walked in 3 small, even steps to where Rosa sat. He bent down in the small, careful, grave cadence he had used on the airport linoleum in 1986. He kissed her very lightly on the forehead. "Thank you, abuela," he said. He sat back down. He fastened the chain around his neck. He let the medal fall, against the small, careful interior pocket of his shirt, against his sternum, against the small, careful interior thing the porch had been, since 1988, slowly teaching him to keep intact. Rosa, on the porch in the yellow dress, looked at him for a long count. She did not, in the long count, cry. She did, however, in the small private accounting she kept of the people she had decided to love, smile. Chapter 2. In Chapter 3. The first Hogsmeade he arrived in the Great Hall on a Tuesday night in November, 2 months after the rest of the first year, in a tasseled wool coat that did not match the long black school robe over it, and the entire student body stopped eating to watch him walk the length of the room. Minerva McGonagall had carried the sorting hat down from her tower without comment. Dumbledore had asked for an exception to the September convention. The school had been told nothing about the new boy's family except that he had been raised abroad. Minerva, who had been informed only that morning that the late-arriving student's surname was Morgan Potter, had spent the day in a quiet, ungenerous mood. The hat sat on Harry's head for 41 seconds. Harry, who had read 3 books on the hat during the autumn and had drawn his own conclusions, said inside his head, neutrally, "I am going into Gryffindor, please. Slytherin would be wasted on me. Hufflepuff would not understand me. Ravenclaw would not understand me either. I will need the cover of recklessness. I will need a dormitory of boys who do not pay close attention. Gryffindor, please." The hat, after a long, careful pause, said back, in the small, dry, private voice it kept for the more interesting children of the century, "You are not, young man, what the previous hatfuls of you would lead a reasonable instrument to expect." "I know," Harry said. "Gryffindor, please." The hat made an internal sound that resembled, very faintly, a laugh. "Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table erupted in the kind of cheer it gave to fashionable late arrivals. Harry walked over with the small, even economy he had been taught at 6. He sat at the end of the bench, beside a red-haired boy who shoved a plate of shepherd's pie at him on instinct. "Brilliant, you're here," said the red-haired boy. "Weasley, did you fly in tonight? Was it a portkey? I have always wanted to take a portkey." "Did you? Hello, Ron," Harry said. "I am Harry Morgan Potter. I flew in by Muggle plane and then took a charmed coach from Heathrow. Yes, the pie, thank you." "Morgan Potter," said Ron, who had been forewarned by his mother and was nevertheless surprised to find the legend turning up beside him with a forearm tan and a slight American accent. You're him. The one with the, are you really? The." "Yes, Ron," Harry said. He took a bite of the pie. It was good pie. He felt neutrally that he had not eaten a pie this good in 5 years. Across the table a girl with very dense brown hair set down her copy of Hogwarts, a history, and folded her arms. "They told us at the start of term you might not come at all," she said. "There was a rumor at the welcome feast that you had been raised by Muggles in America. Is that right?" "Yes." "And that the headmaster had placed you there?" "No," Harry said. "He had placed me elsewhere. Somebody else placed me there." He took a second bite of the pie and looked neutrally at the girl across the table. "I am Hermione Granger," she said. "Hermione," he said, the way Dexter had taught him to say new names, the way you set a name into a memory. "I am Harry. I have heard you came top of the year in the autumn examinations." "How did you know that?" "Your name was in the school newsletter that was sent on by my courier. I have read all of the autumn newsletters this week." "Why?" "To know who I was going to meet." She looked at him for what was, by Hermione standards, a long pause. Then she said, "What books did you read this summer?" He named them. He named also 6 books from the 3rd and 5th year curricula. He named the squib clippings file Rosa had given him, although he did not name Rosa. He named the introductory texts on European magical jurisprudence that he had read because he had needed to understand, in detail, what the Wizarding World's police did and did not investigate, although he did not name that either. Hermione's eyes brightened in a way the Gryffindor table did not, that night, identify as anything other than the usual studious satisfaction. Harry, who had been raised by a careful father to read every face he met, identified it as recognition. He was assigned the empty bed at the far end of the first-year dormitory. He unpacked the trunk with the small habitual efficiency of a child who had been packed and unpacked too many times. He laid out in the wardrobe 3 black robes, 2 gray jumpers, 3 pairs of trousers, a swimming costume he had no intention of using, and his shoes. He did not unpack the lining of the trunk. He shut the trunk and locked it with the small 4-tumbler combination lock Dexter had taught him to set to a number that was not his birthday and not his postal code. He sat on the bed. He looked at the 4-poster canopy. "Hello, school," he thought in the small Dexter Cadence interior voice he had been taught to use for new rooms. He took out a sheet of paper. He wrote, "Dad sorted Gryffindor as planned. Hat conceded. Ron Weasley pleasant and uninterested. Hermione Granger present, intelligent, watching me. McGonagall correct and slightly cold. Dumbledore I have not yet met. Snape I have not yet met. Quirrell observed at supper, head rapt, eyes shifting, breath shallow. The thing in my head went loud when he passed me in the corridor with the plates. He is carrying something. He is not, however, the one carrying it. The one carrying it is sitting somewhere on his head. We'll write again Sunday. Kid." He folded it. He addressed the outer envelope to the Indian Creek safe house via the courier in Lisbon. He set it in the inner pocket of his coat. He went down to supper. He did not meet Quirrell's eyes in the corridor. He felt instead the small, certain interior bell that he had felt twice before in his life. Once in the Surrey garden, with a man named McNair leaning on the hedge. Once at a Bobby Hampton sparring session, in the half-second before a 16-year-old had decided to throw an illegal elbow. The bell was the second oldest thing in him. The bell was what Dexter had called, in the porch lessons, a presence. He filed Quirrell neutrally under watch. He did not file the thing on Quirrell's head because he did not yet have a noun for it. He would by Christmas. The squib clippings would tell him. By the end of his first week, he had memorized the floor plans of 3 floors and the 7 cardinal corridors. By the end of his second, he had sat down with Hermione in the library and asked her, in the small-mannered way Rosa had taught him at 7, if she would not mind teaching him the casting wand motions that the autumn class had covered. She had taught him in 3 afternoons what the rest of his year had taken 12 weeks to learn. She had also, on the 4th afternoon, set her quill down at the small desk by the window in the back stack of the library and looked at him. "You are not surprised by any of this," she said. "By what?" "By any of this. The castle, the food, the staircases, the ghosts. You came in late and you have not at any point in 2 weeks said, 'Oh,' or 'Wow,' or even 'Goodness.' You have not asked me a single question about Hogwarts that a muggle-raised 11-year-old could not answer himself from a single textbook. You have not asked me what a Quidditch is. I know what Quidditch is, Hermione. You see, that is what I mean. I read about Hogwarts in the summer. I read carefully. You read about Hogwarts for 6 years. For 1 summer. Carefully, for 6 years. He held her gaze neutrally. He took a slow internal count of 3. He filed her on the page in his head that had her name on it, under something he had not yet named. He wrote under HERMIONEGRANGER the words possible witness, possible ally, possible friend. He wrote in a column to the right the word careful. He wrote in the column to the right of that the word patience. "Hermione," he said, "you are going to be either the best thing or the worst thing that happens to me at this school. I am sorry I cannot tell you yet which." She did not blink, she did not look away. "All right, Harry," she said. She picked up her quill. She went back to her notes. He picked up his book. He went back to the chapter on levitation. It was the moment from which everything else eventually followed. Snape took him aside in the second week, in an empty potions classroom at the back of the dungeons, with the door shut and the wards on. "Mr. Morgan Potter," he said, and gave the small, precise weight of a man who had read the boy's file and disliked everything it contained. "Let us not waste each other's time. You were raised since the age of 6 by a Muggle American forensic technician of unclear personal habits. You were brought up outside of every magical guardianship convention this school recognizes. You have arrived 2 months late with a fluency in our curriculum that is implausible for a child of your background. You will not in this classroom be allowed to coast on the protections that the headmaster has against my counsel extended to you. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Snape watched him for a long moment. Do not, Mr. Morgan Potter, attempt to draw me on questions of the dark mark. I will not answer them. Do not attempt to draw me on questions of your mother. I will not answer those either. Yes, sir. You may answer one question. Are you what your file suggests? Harry was quiet for a long count. Sir, he said, in the small, careful voice he kept for adults who had read his file, I do not know what my file suggests. I know what I am. I am the boy who was put in a cupboard at 6 and was taken out of it. I am the boy of a careful father. I am here to learn what this school will teach me. I do not intend in any classroom of yours to break a rule. Outside of your classroom, sir, I have my own rules. Snape, who had not been spoken to in this register by a child in 18 years of teaching, did not move. Very well, Mr. Morgan Potter, he said. You may go. Harry inclined his head once, neatly, and left. Snape did not raise an alarm that night either. Snape, who had his own private interior set of rules that he did not call any name out loud, sat in his office and drank his coffee, and at the small private hour after dawn opened the locator he had not opened in 5.5 years, and saw, for the first time in 5.5 years, the green dot of Lily Potter's sun blinking steadily inside the wards of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, with a small new bracket beside it that he had not, in his many years with the instrument, seen on any locator before. He did not know what the bracket meant. He did not, on consideration, want to know. He shut the locator. He went down to teach his first lesson of the day. By the end of the second week, Harry had identified Merk Mulciber, Dogweed and Deathcap, Hogsmeade High Street, opposite the post office. The proprietor was a thin, prematurely graying wizard of about 42 who wore long sleeves in November and answered to Mr. Marshall. Harry had passed the shop on the first day trip the school had unofficially permitted his year, escorted, in defiance of the rules, by a 7th-year prefect with a soft spot for late arrivals, and had felt in the doorway, the second time in his short life, the small certain bell of presence. The shopkeeper had been polite. The shopkeeper had not looked at him twice. The shopkeeper had a tattoo, badly faded, on the inside of his left wrist that he had taken some pains to keep covered, and which Harry, by the angle of the man's pore, had seen for 3/4 of a second when the man had reached for the cash drawer. Harry had walked back to the castle and written to Dexter that evening. He had described the tattoo. He had asked Dexter to cross-reference the customs files. Dexter had cross-referenced, through the Lisbon Courier and the Coral Gables bookseller in Rosa, and had returned in the next courier bag the file on Merk Mulciber. Confirmed Death Eater per testimony at the brothers' hearing. Confirmed murderer of 2 Muggles in Northumberland in October 1981. Confirmed migrant to South Florida January 1982 under the cover name Marshall. Confirmed returnee to Britain via the same magical exchange program December 1987. Once the heat had cooled. Confirmed proprietor of Dogweed and Deathcap since 1989 under the same alias. Harry read the file twice. He wrote out in a separate notebook on a fresh page the 5 rules. He wrote beside the page the answers. Innocent. Number will hurt again. Yes, sells Fluxweed to known Death Eater associates Rookwood Cousins under-the-counter network. Verified. Yes, file. Caught. Will not be kill room outside Hogsmeade, no wards on the gardener's cottage at the back of the Hog's Head. The work is the work. Yes. He showed Dexter the page by post. Dexter, on the porch in Miami, read the page with a slow, even smile. He wrote back, "Approved, kid. One note, takes 6 more weeks. You are 11, you have time. Walk the cottage, walk the back lane. Watch his closing routine for at least 9 separate Saturdays. Make sure the cottage is exactly as silent as you think. Sleep on it twice. Then begin. Love, Dad." He took 6 more weeks. He walked the cottage in the December rain. He walked the back lane. He watched Merk Mulciber close the shop on 9 separate Saturdays. He timed the closing routine to the minute. He bought, on a Hogsmeade weekend with 2 sickles of Christmas pocket money, a length of plastic sheeting from a wholesaler in Diagon Alley by Flue, and 3 rolls of duct tape, and a pair of medical gloves, and a hand-painted wooden mask of the kind sold to Halloween tourists by a witch on the corner of Nocturne. He hid the kit in the cottage attic 3 Saturdays running, building up the stash piece by piece, never carrying more than a single item at a time. He oiled the small leather kit knives. He charmed, after a long evening of practice in an unused classroom, a small silencing rune onto the cottage door. He told no one. He wrote to Dexter every Sunday. On a Saturday in January, the 3rd Saturday of term after Christmas, Merk Mulciber closed his shop at 6:05 p.m. He locked the front door. He walked the back lane to his rented rooms above the Hog's Head, as he did every Saturday. He passed at the back gate of the rooming house an 11-year-old boy in a black school robe who appeared to be reading a book about magical herbology by the light of a wand. "Mr. Marshall," Harry said, neutrally, looking up, "could I trouble you for a moment? My professor has set me a problem about the propagation of fluxweed, and I cannot find the answer in any of the books." "Ah," said Merk Mulciber, who in his 18 months of trading at Dogweed and Deathcap had been asked variations of this question by 68 different students, and had become accustomed to the small flattery of being consulted. "Well, if it is only a moment, what is the problem, lad?" "It is in the gardener's cottage," Harry said. "Professor Sprout asked me to take a cutting, and I cannot get the cutting to take. Would you mind looking at it?" Merk Mulciber, who was not a stupid man but who was, by the standards of his old profession, profoundly out of practice, looked along the back lane at the unlit gardener's cottage. He looked at the boy. He looked at the small thing inside himself that had once, many years ago, warned him about back lanes. He did not that evening listen to it. He had been a shopkeeper for 2 years, and the small thing had, for 2 years, been wrong. "All right," he said. "Lead the way." The cottage took 15 minutes. The work was, by every measure of Dexter's careful porch curriculum, clean. Plastic sheeting on the floor and the table, the small mask, the silencing rune on the door, Merk Mulciber's left wrist bound at 3 points, his right at 4. The careful interview. The slow, even confession, 2 muggles in 1981, 3 associates named in 1989, 1 informant named in 1990. The neat verification. Harry's notebook, page 8, line 3, matched the names Mulciber gave him. Mulciber, near the end, said, "You are the Potter boy. I am Harry Morgan Potter." There were stories. There was a story that he had moved you. There was a story that he had killed you. Avery told a story he had taken you to America. "My father took me to America. Your father is dead. James Potter is dead. James Potter was my first father. The man who raised me is my father. Both of them are correct nouns. The wizarding world will, in time, learn the distinction. You will not be alive to see it." Mulciber looked at the boy on the other side of the table. He looked at the small leather kit. He looked at the boy's eyes. "You are 11. Yes. You will not get away with this for very long. I have been doing this since I was 6. I have not yet begun. I will get away with this for as long as I need to." Mulciber, who at the very end discovered the small thing inside himself that had warned him about back lanes, was still there and had been right all along, did not say anything else. The work was the work. Harry, who had been taught at 6 the rule about pleasure and the rule about revenge and the rule about the job, finished the work in the small, even cadence of a craftsman who had been taught well and had practiced everything he had been taught. The cottage was clean by 8. The body went into the forbidden forest, by a route Harry had charted in October, to be eaten down to bones by the acromantially of whom he had read in the third-year curriculum, and whose location he had cross-checked, in his careful 9 months at the school, with 3 separate older students who had, in confidence, told him the legends. The plastic sheeting and the gloves and the mask went into a Muggle-style incinerator Harry had ordered by mail to the Hog's Head's back paddock, where it had stood unattended for 6 weeks under a tarpaulin. He burned the contents at 9. He walked back to the castle by the back gate. He had a bath in the prefect bathroom. A 5th year had given him the password 3 weeks earlier in exchange for help with an essay, and he washed his hair twice with the school's lavender shampoo, which he had been told was strong enough to mask any smell of any kind, and he went down to the dormitory and slept the small, even sleep of a person whose internal bell, for the first time in 2 months, was quiet. Dogweed and Deathcap did not open on Monday. By Wednesday the oars had been called. By Friday a small notice in the Daily Prophet had reported that Mr. Marshall of Hogsmeade had failed to renew his trading license, and was presumed to have skipped town with the takings. The oars closed the file in March. Merk Mulciber had not, in his 18 months in Hogsmeade, made a single close personal acquaintance. The wizarding world, which had a long bad habit of forgetting any name that did not regularly cross a ministry desk, forgot him in 6 weeks. Harry wrote to Dexter on the Sunday morning, "Dad, first Hogsmeade kill complete. Subject: Mulciber the Younger, confirmed code per verification dossier you sent in November. No surveillance breaches." The small leather kit performed beautifully. The silencing rune held to the second. I slept fine. Hermione had toast at breakfast and looked at me twice during it. She did not ask anything. She has begun to keep a small notebook of her own that she does not show me. We have not yet had the conversation. We will. Quirrell still has whatever is on his head. The thing in my head says it is the first one, the one from the clippings. I have not begun on that line of work. You said begin once verified, and I am not yet at verified, only certain. I will get to verified. Snape has not asked me a thing. Snape, I think, knows. I think also that Snape has, on a slow, long curve, his own rules. I have not asked him about them. I will not. 22 names left on the page. 22. Then 1. Love, kid. He folded the letter. He sealed it. He sent it by the courier owl that came each week from a small charm-resistant address in Lisbon. He went down in the small, even cadence of a Tuesday morning to Transfiguration, where Hermione, in the seat to his left, set out her quill and her 3 color-coded inkwells and turned to him neutrally and said, "Did you have a good weekend, Harry?" "Yes, Hermione," he said. "I had a quiet one. And you?" "I had a thoughtful one." She did not smile. She did not look at him. She opened her textbook to chapter 11, the chapter the class had been assigned, and she dipped her quill in the second inkwell, the blue one, and she began to write. He watched her hand move for a half-second longer than the moment required. He opened his own textbook. He felt very faintly in the careful interior cadence of a son of 2 fathers, the small private bell of a long good thing coming. He filed the bell neutrally under to address. He picked up his quill. He went to work. Dumbledore, at the end of his first week, had sent for him. The office had smelled of lemon and sherbet. The headmaster had been at his perch behind the great oaken desk, with a small silver instrument purring on a side table, and a phoenix on the perch by the window that had, when Harry came in, looked at him for a long, even count without ruffling a feather. Dumbledore had stood up. He had not, by the small, careful internal economy he kept for new students, smiled. "Mr. Morgan Potter, sir. I have in the past week read your file. I had not in the past 5 years had a file on you. I have in the past 3 days attempted to construct one. I find in the construction more gaps than information. Will you sit down?" Harry sat down. "Sir," he said, in the small, careful voice he had been using on adult faces since 6, "I am, on the public record, the adopted son of a Mr. Dexter Morgan of Miami Beach, Florida. I have, since the autumn of 1986, lived with him. I am very fond of him. I am also, on the private record, fond of you. I have read all of your published papers on transfiguration theory. I think the work on the metamorphic stability of the human form in particular is, sir, beautiful." Dumbledore had looked at him for a long even count. He had sat back down. He had folded his hands on the desk. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan Potter." "You are welcome, sir. I had, in 1981, made an arrangement for you with the only adult relative I could at the time find." "Yes, sir." "That arrangement was, on subsequent evidence, and forgive me, the language is mine and not yours, wrong." "Yes, sir. Mr. Morgan, in the autumn of 1986, did a thing I had, on the published timeline of my own concern for your welfare, not done." "Yes, sir. I would, in the course of the next 7 years, like to make a small private effort to compensate you for the period in which the wizarding world did not, on its own initiative, find you. I would like you to know that you are, at this school, welcome. I would like you to know that the office of the headmaster is, in any small or large crisis, open to you. I would like you to know that the man behind the desk is, on his own private accounting, sorry." Harry, in the chair opposite, looked at Albus Dumbledore for a long count of his own. "Sir," he said, "I accept the apology. I will not, in the course of any conversation I have at this school, make it the only thing between us. I would like, in the course of my time here, to be the careful, useful student you would have, on a happier timeline, raised. I would like to have, with you, the conversations you would in that timeline have had. I would like, in addition, to ask of you one small thing. Yes. Do not, sir, in any of my 7 years here, attempt to place me anywhere other than Hogwarts during the summer holidays. I have a father. I will go home in June to him. I will come back in September to you. The arrangement that has worked since 1986 will, with the support of you and the school, continue to work." Dumbledore, behind the desk, was silent for a long count. "Mr. Morgan Potter," he said at last, "I accept the request. You will, every June, return to your father." "Thank you, sir." The phoenix on the perch by the window ruffled a single feather. The silver instrument on the side table purred, in a slightly different register, for half a second, and then resumed its previous note. Dumbledore, on his side of the desk, did not, by any visible signal, react. He did, however, in the small private accounting he kept on the inside of his desk, write a single new line that evening on the page he had been keeping since 1981 on a small, absent, black-haired boy. The line said, "He is, on examination, a more careful person than I am. He is, on the public record, 11. I will not in any course of action deceive him." He closed the page. Merk Mulciber at his shop kept a small green pot of fluxweed in the window. The fluxweed in the window was a tell of the kind the autumn dossier had taught Harry to read for. The pot was the second on the shelf from the right. The pot was rotated once a week by the second of the 2 assistants. The leaves of the fluxweed faced, on any reasonable orientation, north. The rotation, on the second Sunday afternoon Harry walked past the window at 4:11 p.m., had been at 23 degrees east of true north, which was, on the autumn dossier of Dexter's, the small marker by which the British branch of the magical exchange program signaled, on a given week, that a new resupply was due. Harry had walked back to the castle. He had written to Dexter. The reply had come, in 7 days, with a confirmation. Yes, a Dolohov drop-off is due on a Friday in November at Dogweed and Deathcap. Mulciber the younger will be on the till. He will hand over a small leather-wrapped parcel to a man in a green tweed coat. The exchange will take 2 minutes. He will then, in the small, careful pattern he has been using since 1989, close the shop 10 minutes early. He will then, on the small, consistent pattern he has been using since 1989, walk the back lane to his rooms above the Hog's Head. Harry, on the Friday in November, had watched the exchange from the front step of the post office across the high street. The man in the green tweed coat had not been Dolohov. He had been, on close observation, a courier of Dolohov's. The parcel had been small. Mulciber had handed it over with the small, careful, unconscious flick of the left wrist that all of Dexter's Florida Customs files had marked as the resupply gesture. Harry had filed the gesture, neutrally, on the dossier page. He had on the dossier page drawn a single careful red asterisk beside the gesture and the word verified. He had not, that Friday, begun the work. He had, that Friday, begun the kill room. The gardener's cottage at the back of the Hog's Head had been disused since 1978. The roof had a small, careful slate replacement done by a squib named Aberforth some 12 years earlier that the village had not since paid further attention to. The door faced an alley. The alley was unobserved by any standing one trace from the village, by any patrol of the local Orr office. The local Orr office, since 1985, had been a single semi-retired Orr named Dirk Cresswell who lived in the back of the apothecary and attended, on average, to one minor incident a fortnight, and by any window of any house in Hogsmeade that opened onto it. He had, on his first visit to the cottage in October, set down a single small silencing rune on the door. He had, on his second visit in early November, brought the first roll of plastic sheeting. He had, on his third visit on the second Friday of November, brought the first of the 3 rolls of duct tape. He had, on his fourth visit on the third Friday, brought the small leather kit. He had, on his fifth visit on the Saturday before the work, brought a small folded note of his own handwriting, addressed to no one, in which he had written, in the careful small cadence he had practiced on the porch for 2 years, the 5 rules. He had pinned the note, with a small tin tack he had bought at the Hogsmeade ironmonger, to the inside of the cottage door. He had read it every Saturday morning for the 7 Saturdays between the 3rd Friday of November and the 3rd Saturday of January, before he had let himself, on the 3rd Saturday of January, walk Merk Mulciber up the alley to the cottage door. The note had said, "Never the innocent. Verify. Never get caught. The work is the work. Always know the name." He had, on the morning of the work, in his own small, careful handwriting, added, in pencil, at the bottom of the note, a single 6th line. The 6th line, in the small, careful hand of an 11-year-old who had been, since 1988, the small, careful work of 2 careful fathers and a black beans Cuban grandmother, had said, "If at any point the room argues, walk out." He had read all 6. He had nodded once to the empty cottage. He had gone to fetch the man. McGonagall, in the 2nd week of January, summoned him to her office. She had not, in the previous 2 months, summoned him for anything other than the standing Friday afternoon Transfiguration review the school offered all late arrivals. She had not, in the corridor or at the staff table, given any small visible signal that her interest in him was anything other than the careful patient interest of a deputy headmistress in a student who had, by every documented measure, arrived 2 months late and had nevertheless outperformed every classmate in the autumn assessments. She closed the door behind him. She drew her wards. She sat behind her desk. "Mr. Morganpotter." "Madam." "There has in the village last week been a small unpleasantness." "Yes, madam, the shopkeeper marshal, the village has been talking. The Orrs closed the file on Friday." "Yes, madam." She looked at him for a long, careful count. "I will, Mr. Morgan Potter, ask you one question. I will not repeat it. I will not, if you decline to answer it, repeat any related question. I will not in any month of any year raise the question with the headmaster, with the Orrs, or with any other party. I am asking it of you in my own private capacity. Do you understand?" "Yes, madam." "Are you in any way safe?" He looked at her. He did not, for a long, careful count, reply. He looked, for the long count, into the cold, careful gaze of a deputy headmistress who had spent 38 years at the school and had, on private testimony, never asked a student that exact question before. He said in the small grave voice he had practiced on adult faces since 6, "Yes, madam, I am safe. I have, since the autumn of 1986, been very thoroughly safe. I will, in any month of any year here, continue to be safe. If at any point I am not, I will, on my own initiative, tell you. I give you my word." Minerva McGonagall, behind the desk, looked at him for a very long count. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan Potter." "You are welcome, madam. You may go." He went. She did not, on the small, careful private accounting she kept, on the inside of her own desk, on a page she had begun in 1981, raise the question again. She did, however, write a single new line on the page that evening. The line said, "He is, on examination, safer than most of the children in this castle." She closed the page. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The subject who did not fit he was 13 and 4 days when the third name on the autumn list went, by an act of his own decision and against the advice of the small interior bell, off the page entirely. The autumn list had 11 names. 2 had been signed off in the spring. 3 were on the long verification track and would not, on present pace, be ready before 6th year. The remaining 6 were divided between 3 Hogsmeade locals, 2 traveling salesmen who came through on the Christmas circuit, and a man who lived in a small stone bothy out past the forest's edge and had been known, in his early life, by the name Cashin Rookwood. Cashin was the third name. He was 46. He was the nephew of Augustus Rookwood, the unspeakable who had passed ministry secrets to Voldemort for half of the First War and was, at present, in the high-security wing of Azkaban with no prospect of release. Cashin had been 23 at the war's end. He had been arrested in late 1981 and released for lack of evidence in early 1982. He had moved in the years since through 3 jobs in 3 counties, and by 1990 had settled in Hogsmeade as a physician, the village's only, with rooms over the apothecary and a small surgery at the back of the post office that the village trusted with births, broken arms, and the small, slow infections of old age. The code dossier on him was thick. Harry had begun the dossier in November of his 2nd year on the strength of a single line in Avery Travers's old journal, "There are still loyal Rookwoods." The line was light evidence. Harry had treated it at 12 as a marker. He had treated it at 13 as a starting point. He had asked Dexter for the customs files on the magical exchange program. Cashin had not, the files said, ever migrated. He had asked Rosa for the squib clippings on the 1981 arrests. Cashin's release had been signed by Bartemius Crouch the Elder, on the grounds that the man had been a child of 17 at the time of his alleged inducement, and that the inducement could not be proved. Harry had filed this neutrally and moved on. He had begun the field work in the September of his 3rd year. He had paid for Cashin's services twice in the autumn, on 2 minor pretexts. He had let the man set the small charm on his cracked rib after a Quidditch fall, and he had let the man examine a Hogwarts boil for him in October. The man's hands had been steady. The man's eyes had not blinked, on close observation, at any reasonable rate. Harry had noted this and assigned it to the column he had built at 9 on the Indian Creek porch. The column was the column that asked whether the subject was carrying something. By mid-October, he had identified the tell. Cashin Rookwood when his sleeve rode up at the wrist during a routine charm, showed not a faded skull, but a series of small white half-moon scars in a pattern Harry had read about 3 times in the 3rd and 4th year defense texts. The half-moons were the long signature of a sustained imperious, the very small involuntary self-injury that a victim of the curse made when his higher self was, briefly, allowed any access to his fingers. The half-moons were always at the wrist. The half-moons were always in pairs. The half-moons were always made with the subject's own teeth. Harry had set down his quill at his desk in the back stack of the library on a Thursday evening in October and held very still for a minute and a half. Then he had picked up the quill, and he had written in the lower margin of his Cashin page, in a hand he had taught himself the previous summer to be small and unobtrusive at the bottom of pages, imperious marking, not yet verified, 6 weeks before any further action. Begin counter-evidence stream. He had underlined begin counter-evidence stream. The next 6 weeks were the longest piece of work he had done at the school. He read the entire 2nd-year defense text on the unforgivables. He read the 2 3rd-year supplementaries the library had on imperious medical literature. He read, by special order through Madame Pince, who had begun, over the previous 12 months, to treat his requests with the small, grim curiosity of a person who had decided to find out, eventually, what the boy was building. 3 medical journals from the 1970s with case studies of long, imperious carriers. He learned the small clinical map of the curse's residence, the way it nested in the brain stem, the way it migrated to the frontal lobe under stress, the way it broke, when it broke, in the small private hour after dawn when a man's defenses were lowest. He learned the counter-curses. There were 3. One of them required a fully qualified aura with a ministry-issued release of obligation. 2 of them required only a focused wand, a precise wording, and the cooperation of the cursed party. He memorized both. He took Cashin's pulse, on 3 separate weekly visits to the surgery, with a small charmed amulet Dexter had sent him from Miami in November, which read for the small flickering interference pattern that a sustained imperious caused on the carotid. All 3 readings registered the pattern. The 3rd reading registered it strongly enough to be diagnostic. He sat in the surgery on the 3rd Saturday and looked into Cashin Rookwood's tired, courteous face and considered. For the long count of 3 he had been taught at 8 to take before any operational decision, the file. The file, on its first column, said that Cashin Rookwood was a Death Eater associate, had been arrested in 1981, had been seen at 3 Death Eater social gatherings in the late 1970s, and had been named by 2 convicted Death Eaters in subsequent hearings as a member of the Inner Ring. The file, on its second column, said that all 3 of those data points were dated before the autumn of 1981. The file, on its second column, said that the man had not, in any month of any year since, been seen at any meeting, named in any subsequent testimony, observed in any compromising association, or been within 5 miles of any of the village's 8 known Death Eater visitors. The file, on its third column, the column Harry had begun at 9 and had not for years had a name for, was blank. Cashin Rookwood, in the surgery on the 3rd Saturday in November, said, "Are you all right, lad? You have been staring at my left wrist for a long minute." "Sir," Harry said in the small, careful voice he had been taught at 6 to use for moments that required courtesy in place of revelation. "I had wondered only what made the small scars there. I apologize. It is rude. My father in the States taught me to notice things and not in general to ask about them. I am 13. I am still learning the second half." Cashin looked at his own wrist. He looked at the boy. "They are," he said after a long, careful moment, "an old injury. They are nothing. They are not a thing I generally discuss. Of course, I am sorry." The man looked at him for a half-second longer. "You are an unusual child, Mr. Morgan Potter." "Yes, sir. I have been told." You will not, I think, make a bad doctor if you choose to go that way. Thank you, sir. Harry paid for the consultation. He took his receipt. He walked out of the surgery into the soft Hogsmeade snow, and he did not, in 940 paces between the surgery door and the south gate of the school grounds, look back once. In the empty Charms corridor on the second floor of the castle, he stopped beside a window. He stood at the window for a long time. The snow on the lake was a steady, careful gray. The interior bell, which had been silent since October, was silent still. He took out the caution page. He took out his quill. He drew in the lower margin beside the line imperious marking a small precise asterisk. Beside the asterisk he wrote, hold indefinitely, continued surveillance, countercurse research priority, no work. He capped the quill. He folded the page. He went down to supper. He wrote to Dexter that night. Dad, the third autumn name is off the active list. The marking is correct. The imperious is sustained, current, and almost certainly 12 years old, applied at the moment of his 1981 release. The pattern is textbook. 3 medical journals confirm. The pulse charm read positive on 3 separate days. The man is a Death Eater on paper and a hostage in fact. He has been an honest village physician for 9 years, and his patients, on a sample of 47 I quietly canvassed in October and November, regard him as the kindest man in the village. I have not begun the work, and I will not begin the work. I have given him an asterisk. I am beginning countercurse research. If I can lift the curse without exposing myself, I will, eventually, try. If I cannot, I will continue to surveil. The code does not move on him. I have been awake 3 nights with this. The interior bell was wrong the first time it ever was. The interior bell read him as an enemy in October because it had read the marking and had not yet read the man behind the marking. I have, at 13, learned the bell is a tool, not a verdict. I think this is the lesson of the porch you did not, when you were teaching me, yet have a name for. I think this is what you were testing me toward in March of 1988 with the milkshake. I think you would, in this case, approve. I love you, kid. The reply came in the Friday Courier. Kid approved. Hard. The interior bell is a tool. It is not the work, and it is not the rule. You have, this autumn, become a man whose tools serve his work, and not the other way around. Harry Morgan, when I was 23, told me at his hospital bed 3 days before he died that the moment I had a tool that argued back with my code, I was to put the tool down and the work down and walk out of the room. I did not for many years understand him. You have understood him at 13. This makes you, in the small private accounting I keep of you, ahead of where I was at 31. Watch yourself. The countercurse work is dangerous. Do not attempt it on the man until you have practiced on a willing target 3 times. Use Hermione if you decide in due course that Hermione is in. Use no one else. Love you, son. 3 months till summer. Dad. He read the letter twice. He read it a 3rd time on the porch in his head, in March of 1988, with the wisteria and the milkshake and the careful small column on the right. He folded the letter. He put it in the inner pocket. Harry Morgan's ghost voice. The long, soft, contractionless voice of a Miami patrolman who had been dead for 10 years, and had nevertheless lived in his adopted son's interior for every minute of that decade, came to Harry Potter for the first time in late November. He was lying on his back in the 4-poster bed in the Gryffindor dormitory at 2 in the morning, having woken from a dream of the bothy at the forest's edge in which Cassian Rookwood had been on the table, and Harry had been beside the table, and the wrist scars had been bigger than the man, and the man had been begging Harry to begin, and Harry had been unable, in the dream, to either begin or walk away. He woke with his hand on his chest, and his breath very even, and his face, for the first time in many years, wet. The voice came to him from inside his own head. in the cadence Dexter had taught him by reading him bedtime stories in 1988 and 1989, the cadence of a Florida policeman who had loved his son. "Listen to me, son." He listened. "You have done the right thing." He breathed. "You are going to spend many years of your life walking into rooms in which the right thing is not the thing you came to do. The code is a code because it survives a room like that. A rule that you keep only when it pleases you is not a rule. The man on the table tonight in your dream will not, in waking, be on your table. You will let him live. You will, eventually, lift his curse. You will eventually give him back the life that was taken from him in 1981 by the men whose names are still on the page above his." He listened. "You are not, son, your father. You are not the Dark Lord. You are not Dexter. You are the third one. You are the third kind of person. You are the one who knows when to stand down. You are the one I would have wanted to raise." He listened. "Go to sleep, kid." He went to sleep. Hermione, by the second week of December, had noticed. He saw her notice. He saw her, on a Wednesday evening in the library, set down her quill and look across the table at him for a long moment, and then look down at her notebook again. He saw her, on the next Saturday in Hogsmeade, walk past Cashin Rookwood's surgery and slow her step for half a beat and then walk on. He saw her, on the Monday after, take down from the medical shelf in the library the same third-year defense supplementary he had taken down in October and check it out, and read it on her side of the common room fire while he read his potions homework on his. She did not say anything. She had decided, somewhere in the previous 12 months, that whatever she had to say to him she would say in her own time, in a setting she had chosen. He filed her on the Hermione page, under the column he had finally given a name to, trusted, conditional. He waited. The third weekend in December was the last Hogsmeade weekend before Christmas, and Harry, on his way back to the castle in the late afternoon, walked past Cashin Rookwood's surgery and saw, through the back window pane, the doctor on his knees on the consulting room floor, his hands pressed flat to the boards, his shoulders shaking, his face the careful, empty face of a man whose imperious had, at the small private hour after dawn that morning, slipped its hold for 30 seconds and given him back the awful clean memory of what he had agreed in 1981 to be made to do. Harry stood at the window. He did not move. He could, with a wand drawn at this moment, end the doctor. He could, with a wand drawn at this moment, end the curse. He could, with no wand drawn, walk on. He stood at the window for a long count of 6. He thought of the milkshake on the porch. He thought of the small green-shirted joggers on the South Beach bench. He thought of the 11 faces on the butcher paper, and the red circle, and the second red circle, and the small column on the right that he had been, since 1988, slowly and carefully learning to wait. He thought of Rosa in the kitchen with the black beans, and of Bobby Hampton on the heavy bag, and of Dexter in the porch chair, and of Harry Morgan in the dream voice. He drew his wand. He did not move from the window. He did not enter the surgery. He did not, by any further visible act, betray himself. He whispered under his breath, in the careful, well-practiced, twice-rehearsed cadence of the Leverett counter-incantation, the second of the 2 counter-curses the third-year supplementaries had taught him, the one that worked at 30 paces if the caster was extraordinarily focused, and the target was, by chance, in a moment of weakened curse hold, the 4 words of the partial untying. A small silver thread flickered, very briefly, in the air between the window and the consulting room floor. It touched, in passing, the shoulders of the man on his knees. The man on his knees stopped shaking. The man on his knees looked up. He looked at the window. He saw in the late afternoon Hogsmeade snow a 13-year-old boy in a school robe with a wand still half raised. He did not call out. He did not stand up. He looked at the boy. The boy nodded once neutrally, the careful small acknowledgement of a craftsman to a man who had survived a long error not of his own making. The man on the floor, after a long moment, nodded back. The boy lowered his wand. He turned. He walked in the small, even cadence of a Tuesday morning up the long road to the castle. He did not look back. He did not, that evening, tell anyone what had happened. He wrote it down only later in the second notebook in the lower margin of the Cashin page, in a hand he had taught himself to be small and unobtrusive at the bottom of pages in 3 words, partial. He felt. He underlined felt. He capped the quill. He sat at his desk for a long time. He thought about the man on the floor. He thought about the imperious. He thought about the wrist scars and the half-moons and the small private accountings by which a man, year by year, kept his code intact. He did not name what he felt. He named only what he saw. He had, that afternoon in the snow outside the surgery window, become, by a half-degree he would not for many years have a noun for, the third kind of person Harry Morgan had named for him in the small night voice of November. He went down to supper. Hermione, at the supper table, set down her fork after the soup course and looked across at him. "I have been meaning to ask, Harry," she said, "if you would have tea with me at the 3 Broomsticks the first Saturday of next term. We have not since first year properly talked. I have a number of things I would like to discuss with you, if that is acceptable to you." He looked at her. He looked at her in the small, careful way he had been taught to look at 6 at the people who would, in time, become either the best thing or the worst thing that happened to him. "Yes, Hermione," he said, "it is acceptable." "Good," she said. She picked up her fork. She ate her soup. He ate his. Outside the great hall the snow continued, even and patient and gray, on the long lawn down to the lake. And in the small lit room above the apothecary in Hogsmeade, a doctor who had been a hostage for 12 years stood slowly up from his consulting room floor, and walked to his cabinet, and took down the small phial of dittany he kept there for difficult patients, and looked at his own face for a long time in the cabinet's small mirror. He did not yet have the words for what had happened to him at the window. He did not yet, on his own, have the strength to throw off the curse entirely. He had been given, by a boy he did not know, 30 seconds of his own life back, and in 30 seconds of his own life, he had decided, of his own free will, that whatever the boy was on balance, the right side of the long line. He went down in the small, even cadence of a Saturday evening to lock the surgery door. He did not that night raise an alarm. He waited. He had begun in the second week of October by going to the village for the first booking. He had walked into the small consulting room at 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon, and had given his name to the woman at the front desk as Harry Morgan Potter, 3rd year, and had paid the consultation fee in advance from the small velvet pouch of Galleon's Dexter had wired him at the start of term. He had sat on the bench by the door, the way the older village customers did, with his school robe folded across his lap and his green eyes on the small framed certificates on the wall opposite him. The certificates had been issued in 1971 and 1972 by the Edinburgh Teaching Hospital and by St. Mungo's General Ward. The frames had been recently dusted. When the woman at the front desk had called his name, he had stood up, in the small, even cadence of a child who had been to many consulting rooms in many cities, and he had gone in. Cashin Rookwood had stood up from his desk. He had not, in the 4 seconds of standing, made any of the small, unconscious gestures the autumn texts had taught Harry to read on Death Eater faces. He had not touched his left forearm, in the small, habitual, unconscious gesture of a man checking his mark. He had not looked at the doorway, in the small, habitual gesture of a man whose colleagues, in 1981, had taught him always to look at doorways. He had instead, in the simple, courteous gesture of a country doctor, held out his hand. "Mr. Morgan Potter, sir. Sit down, I have the form here. I will only ask you the small new questions, everything else the school has already shared with me on the standing form. Tell me about the rib." Harry had told him about the rib. The doctor's hands had been steady. The small charm he had cast had been a textbook bone mend. Harry, who had read the third-year curriculum on bone mends in August, had recognized it on the first wand motion. The wand motion had been clean. The wand motion had not been hurried. The wand motion had been performed by a man who had cast it, on the conservative count, 300 times. The rib had eased. Harry had said in the small, careful, courteous voice he had practiced at the porch table at 6, "Thank you, sir." "You are welcome, Mr. Morgan Potter." "Sir, may I ask the certificate on the wall there, that is the Edinburgh Teaching Hospital?" "It is." "You did your training there, from 1969 to 1972, and you have practiced since in private practice for the most part since 1972. I came to Hogsmeade in the spring of 1989. The previous practitioner here was a friend of mine. He retired. He recommended me to the village council. They accepted me on a 3-year probation. I am, in the present quarter, 2 years and 3 months into the 3-year period. "Thank you, sir." He had paid for the consultation. He had walked back to the castle. He had filed on the cash-in page every word of the conversation. He had filed in the column on the right the word "steady hands," no defensive gestures, no inquisitive gestures, no unnecessary information given, no apparent recognition of the boy's surname or scar. He had walked in the small, even cadence of a Wednesday evening to supper. He had felt, on the way to supper, the small, uncertain interior bell. The bell on the cash-in page had been, for the first time in 3 years, ambiguous. The bell had said neutrally presence, but the presence had not been the presence of a Travers or a Mulciber. The presence had been a quieter, slower, sadder thing, and Harry had not, until the 3rd week of October, known what to call it. Hermione had begun, in the 2nd week of November, to leave him small notes. The notes had been folded square, in the careful, unfussy quarterfolds she used for her own filing system, and had been left on the corner of his desk in the library each Wednesday and Saturday evening at 6:15 p.m. for a window of exactly 4 minutes, during which she had been at the charms section pulling reference texts, and during which his table had been, by her own careful planning, the only empty desk in the back stack. He had begun on the 3rd note to anticipate them. The 1st note had said in her small, even hand, "Have you read the defense supplementary on long imperious patterns of self-injury? Section 3. It is at p. 217. The 2nd note had said, "I read it. I have a question. Do you know if the half-moon pattern at the wrist is specific to a single caster, or does it manifest in the same form across all sustained victims?" The 3rd note had said, "I have done the cross-checks. It is the same form across all sustained victims. I have, in the 3rd year and 4th year journals, found 4 documented cases in the past decade. I would like, if you have time, to speak with you about the literature. Library, Saturday, 6:15 p.m. Yours, H." He had gone to the library on the Saturday. She had not, in the conversation that followed, named any names. She had not, in the conversation that followed, accused him of anything. She had simply, in the small, careful auditor's cadence she had taught herself over the previous 12 months, asked him 3 questions about the literature, about the duration of the curse in confirmed cases, about the visible signs the text had documented, about the partial countercurses available in theory to a competent 3rd-year student with library access. He had answered her, in the small, careful auditor's cadence of his own. They had spoken, in total, for 41 minutes. At the end of the 41 minutes she had set down her quill on the desk. She had folded her hands. She had looked at him. "Harry," she had said, "whoever it is, and I am this evening asking nothing about whoever it is, I will, with the same library access and the same time, read what you are reading. I am, in addition, very good at the small, precise pulse charm Madame Pomfrey teaches at the start of the 3rd-year medical unit. If you ever at any point wish a second set of eyes on a clinical detail, You may ask me. I will not until that asking intervene. I have decided this autumn that I do not need to intervene. I have decided this autumn that I will, however, be ready. He had looked at her for a long count. All right, Hermione. Thank you, Harry. She had picked up her quill. She had gone back to her notes. He had filed in the second notebook on the Hermione page. On the column he had given a name to in January of 1992, the word. The word had been ready. In the small private hour after dawn on the second Sunday in December, Cassian Rookwood had woken in his small bedroom above the apothecary with the long, flat exhaustion of a man who had spent the night in a dream he had been having, on average, 3 times a week since November 1981. The dream had always been the same. In the dream, he had been 23 and had been standing in a kitchen in Northumberland, in his late October coat, with a wand in his hand and a man on the floor at his feet. The man on the floor had been a muggle, a tenant farmer named Wilson, and Wilson had been bleeding from the ear. Behind Cassian in the dream had been 3 older men in robes, and the youngest of the 3 had had a face that the dream, with its small, careful editorial discretion, had never quite in 12 years allowed Cassian to see. The young man in the robes had said in the dream, in the imperious sibilant cadence Cassian had spent 12 years trying to forget, the single word, again. Cassian in the dream had cast the curse again. Wilson on the floor had stopped breathing. In the dream, Cassian had stood with the wand still in his hand, and had felt for a half-second the small interior bell that had told him, at 23 in the kitchen in Northumberland in the late October coat, that he had a half-second to either drop the wand and run, or to cast a third curse on himself that would end the choosing. He had not in the half-second dropped the wand. He had not in the half-second cast the third curse. He had stood in the kitchen and had waited in the small, careful, obedient cadence of a young man who had not yet found the small interior thing that would, in some other timeline, have told him number. The young man behind him had stepped forward. The young man behind him had said, in the same imperious sibilant cadence, the second word. The second word had been, well, the second word had been, in 12 years of the dream, the worst word. Cassian, on the December Sunday morning, had woken from the dream in the long, flat exhaustion that he had learned over 12 years to live with. He had washed his face. He had dressed. He had gone down to his consulting room to begin the small preparatory work of a Sunday surgery. He had, in the consulting room, kneeled on the boards to retrieve a small file that had rolled, the previous evening, into the gap between the desk and the wall. He had reached for it. He had been on his knees when the small, unfamiliar thing had happened. The small, unfamiliar thing had been silence. For a count of 30 seconds in the small consulting room, the long, quiet pressure on the inside of his skull that he had not, for 12 years, even noticed as a pressure because it had been there for 12 years, and had become, by sustained presence, the texture of his interior life, had eased. He had felt for 30 seconds the small, clean, unsupervised quality of his own thought. He had felt for 30 seconds the small, precise, unspoken sentence, "This is what I used to feel like." He had begun in the small consulting room in his small Sunday morning shirt, on his knees on the boards, to shake. He had not understood, until he had looked up at the front window of the surgery in the second of the 30 seconds, where the silence had come from. In the window, in the late afternoon Hogsmeade snow that had begun, gently, while he had been at his desk, he had seen very faintly a small silver thread of light that had not, in his 12 years of practice, ever passed through that window. He had looked beyond the window into the high street. He had seen, standing on the front step of the post office across the street, a 13-year-old boy in a school robe with a wand still half raised. The boy had looked at him. He had looked at the boy. The boy had nodded once. He had not understood in the 30 seconds what the nod was. He had not had in 12 years the framework to understand it. He had only known in the small, careful, unsupervised second of his own thought that something had been done to him from outside that was, on his own free assessment of it, good. He had nodded back. The boy had lowered his wand. The boy had turned. The boy had walked, in the small, even cadence of a Saturday afternoon, up the long road to the castle. Cashin, on his knees on the consulting room floor, had taken, by the count of the small, unsupervised seconds, the full 30 before the long, flat pressure had returned. In the full 30 he had thought, in the slow, careful, unsupervised cadence of a man who had not had 30 unsupervised seconds in 12 years, the 3 sentences that would, on the long, careful timeline of his eventual full recovery, be the spine of his way back. The 3 sentences had been, I have been for 12 years the prisoner of the men whose names I will, when I am free, give to the boy in the school robe. I have been for 12 years on the wrong side of the line, and I have not for 12 years been allowed to know it. I have, in the boy in the school robe, a friend whose name I do not yet know. He had stood slowly from the consulting room floor. He had gone to his cabinet. He had taken down the small file of dittany he kept for difficult patients. He had set it on the desk. He had not for 30 seconds been a prisoner. He had not in 30 seconds learned how to be free. The long, unsupervised version of that lesson would, on the small, careful timeline of the spring of 1994, take Hermione Granger and 3 Sundays in the back stack of the library, and the perfected wand motion of the full countercurse before it concluded. But he had learned in the 30 seconds that there was, in the world, a boy who had decided, on whatever evidence the boy had decided on, to give him back his own life. He had sat down at his desk. He had cried for 10 minutes. He had cleaned his face. He had unlocked the surgery door. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, Hermione. She had chosen the booth at the back of the 3 broomsticks the way she chose her library seats, against a wall, with a sight line to the door, and out of any of the 4 casual eavesdrop arcs that Madame Rosmerta and the regulars made through the room on a Saturday afternoon. She had arrived 11 minutes early. She had ordered 2 pots of tea. She had placed on the table in front of her a soft leather folder of the kind she usually used for revision notes, and she had set on top of the folder her wand, parallel to the seam of the leather. Harry came in at 12. He had walked from the castle by the long path. He had stopped twice, at the 2nd and at the 5th bend of the lane, to take a slow, even breath and to remind himself, in the cadence he had been taught at 6, that the work was the work and the friend was the friend, and the 2 things on this Saturday were the same thing. He had not, for a long count of years, walked into a room with this much weight on it. He had walked into 7 rooms in his short life with the weight of finishing a piece of work. This one was different. This one was a verification. He sat down opposite her. He hung his cloak on the booth peg. He looked at the folder. He looked at her. Hermione, Harry, I have not in any of our conversations lied to you. I want to begin with that. I know, she said. I have noticed. She did not move the wand. She did not by any visible act threaten him with it. The wand was on the table the way her quill was on the desk. The wand was, on this Saturday, a tool. She slid the folder across the table. I would like you, she said, to read this. I have made a copy. The original is somewhere safe and not in any sense on me. The copy is yours to keep or burn or hand back to me. I am, after you have read it, going to ask you 3 questions. I would like you to answer them honestly. If you cannot answer them honestly, I would like you to tell me you cannot answer them and not lie. All right. He opened the folder. The folder was 31 pages, in her neat round hand, with a color-coded index, 3 Daily Prophet clippings in pasted columns, 2 pages of cross-referenced dates pulled from the school's Hogsmeade signing-out ledger, 6 pages of pulse-check data she had taken on him without his knowledge during morning transfiguration over the previous 4 months, 4 pages of bibliographic notes on the books he had ordered through Madame Pince since November of his second year. 3 pages from the back of a defense textbook with the half-moon imperious pattern photocopied and annotated in her hand, and a small, careful 1-page chronology beginning at 6 November 1991, HMP arrives, and ending at 16 December 1993, CR seen kneeling, partial countercurse cast at 30 paces from south window. He read every page. He took 14 minutes. He set the folder down. He folded his hands on the table. He felt in the small interior cadence of a person whose careful work had been, by another careful person, witnessed, a thing he had agreed with himself at 9 not to name in public. He named it anyway internally for the small ledger he kept on the Hermione page. He named it relief. It was the named emotion of that year. He let it. "Ask," he said. She did not look down at any of her own notes. 1. The shopkeeper Marshall, the traveling potions agent Berenice Trapp, the visitor at the Hog's Head Trevor Yaxley. The Daily Prophet missing persons column lists all 3 between January 1992 and August 1993. The Aurors closed all 3. In each case, on the night the person disappeared, you signed out of the school in the late afternoon and returned alone at or before curfew. You were 11, 12, and 13. Did you have anything to do with the 3 disappearances? Yes. She did not move. She had, he saw, prepared for the yes. 2. Cassian Rookwood, the village doctor. On the 3rd Saturday of December last year, you were observed by me through the front window of the High Street Post Office at the precise moment that, by the testimony of the apothecary's assistant who was on duty in the back room, Dr. Rookwood was seen, through the connecting doorway, having what the assistant described to me as an episode. Dr. Rookwood is alive. He is, I have on independent investigation, an imperious victim of long standing, and his curse has been, over the 4 weeks since that Saturday, in slow, visible recession. Did you have anything to do with him? Yes. 3. She paused. She had, he saw, prepared for this question more carefully than the other 2. You have an adoptive father. The school records list him as Dexter Morgan, forensic technician with the Miami-Dade Police Department. The school records describe your guardianship as informal. There is no Wisengamot order, no ministry guardianship, no British paperwork at all. The custody is, on paper, irregular. I have looked with some care into Mr. Morgan. He is not on the public record, a man with any criminal entry of any kind. He is, however, a man who has been on the periphery of a number of unsolved disappearances in South Florida between 1985 and 1991. Did Mr. Morgan, in any sense, teach you the work I am describing? Yes. She held his eyes for a long count. Tell me, she said. Tell me all of it. I am not on this Saturday going to make any decision about it until I have heard all of it. I will not, while you are talking, write any of it down. I will not, after you have finished, repeat any of it to anyone unless I have decided in my own time that the world requires it. I want you to tell me everything. Begin at the beginning. Begin in the cupboard. He looked at her. He took a slow, even breath in through the nose and let it out. He began in the cupboard. He talked for 97 minutes. He told her about Avery Travers and the warehouse in Doral. He told her about the photograph of his face above the cot in the second-floor bedroom in Privet Drive, the one Petunia had not, in 5 years, allowed Vernon to take down. He told her about the latch on the outside of the cupboard. He told her about the man kneeling on the carpet at 4:48 in the morning who had held out his hand. He told her about Rosa and the wisteria and the color-coded plastic chips. He told her about the porch in March 1988 and the milkshake and the 5 rules. He told her about the leather notebook and the small column on the right and the slow, careful building of a kill list a child had taught himself, with help, to verify. He told her about Mulciber the Younger in the gardener's cottage. He told her about the traveling potions agent. He told her about Trevor Yaxley, who had been one of the men in the Surrey garden in 1986, the one with the white scar on the cheekbone. He told her about every name on the second notebook, in the order he had taken them, and the order he intended to take the ones still standing. He told her about Cash and Rookwood and the wrist scars and the asterisk, and the snow outside the surgery window. He told her about Harry Morgan, the dead Miami patrolman who lived in his head and in his adoptive father's, and the new third voice that had begun, in November, to live in his. He told her about Voldemort. He told her about the squib clippings file in Rose's drawer. He told her about the kill room he had begun, in early November of that year, to prepare in a Wiltshire graveyard he had walked the perimeter of, with a borrowed time turner he was not supposed to know existed, twice in the autumn. He told her that he had a name for the boy on the other side of the eggs at the Indian Creek table in 1986, and a name for the boy on the porch in 1988, and a name for the boy at the Surrey gate at 6, and that the names were the same name, and the name had a job that was not, by any reasonable accounting, finished. He told her about the third voice. He told her, finally, what he had not in 7 years told anyone, including Dexter, that he was, by the small private accounting he kept on certain nights in his life, afraid. Not afraid of the work. Afraid of what would happen if, in the course of the work, he stopped being the third kind of person. Afraid of the small, slow possibility, in any of the rooms he was preparing to walk into, that he might one day be the second kind. Afraid of the man on his knees in the consulting room, and what that man would have looked like with a wand of his on his throat, on a Saturday in which the bell had been less precise. He told her about the asterisk page. He told her that he had asked himself in the snow outside the surgery whether the asterisk page was the most important page in the second notebook. He told her, in the very last minute of his 97 minutes, that he had concluded the next morning that it was. She had not in 97 minutes picked up her wand from the table. She had not in 97 minutes touched her tea. The tea had gone cold a long time ago. Madame Rosmerta had, twice, glanced at the booth and gone back to the bar with the small professional incuriosity of a publican who had decided early in her career that any conversation that ran longer than 40 minutes in the back booth was none of her business. Hermione, at the end of the 97 minutes, sat very still for a long count. "Harry," she said, "may I have your hand for a moment?" He gave her his hand. She held it on the table between them. Her grip was even. Her grip was not warm. "You have done a very large amount of work," she said. "Some of it is, on close examination, what the law would call murder, and what the public would call murder, and what I would call, on close examination, the slow and careful execution by a child of a private justice that the institutions of our world have, by negligence and corruption, and the limits of a war they did not finish, abdicated. I do not, on the Saturday I have you in front of me, intend to condemn any of that work. I do, however, intend to set down terms. My terms are these. 1. Every name on the second notebook is from this afternoon audited by me. I will see the file. I will read the file. I will reach my own conclusion. The 5 rules of your father stand. They are, on examination, good rules. To them I add, as a 6th, that no name moves off the page to the active list until both you and I have signed it. If we disagree, the name stays on the page. If we agree, it moves. The default position on any name I cannot verify with my own eyes is the asterisk. 2. The voices. The third voice that began in November, Harry Morgan, in your head is welcome at this table. If on the course of any future name that voice tells you to stand down, you stand down. I will not in that situation override the voice. The voice has, on the only evidence I have, been right. 3. Ron is never told. Ron is what the bothy at the edge of the forest is, a thing we walk past intact and do not disturb. He is the part of the world we are doing this to keep. If Ron asks me, I will lie. If Ron asks you, you lie. He stays the boy he is, agreed. 4. If in any month of any year I come to believe that what you are doing has stopped being justice and started being something else, for any reason, large or small, I tell you, you stop. We re-verify together every standing name. If we cannot, after that re-verification, agree on a single name, you leave Britain. You go back to Miami. The work here ends. 5. The man with the wrist scars. She paused. She held his hand a little tighter. You finish the counter-curse with my help. You give that man back his life. That is not a condition. That is a request. I have spent 4 weeks reading the literature. I think we can do it before Easter. I would like, in the small private accounting I am beginning to keep, for you to have begun your 14th year by giving someone their life back and not only taken one. Will you do it? He looked at her. He breathed in through the nose. He breathed out. Yes, Hermione, to all 5. Good. She let his hand go. She picked up her wand. She slid the wand into the holster at her left forearm. He had not, until that gesture, known she had a holster, and she set the leather folder back on the table between them. This, she said, is yours. The original I will this evening destroy. I will keep in its place a smaller working dossier of my own, which I will share with you weekly in the back stack of the library. I propose Sunday evenings after supper with Coco. I propose on the same evenings that we work together on the counter-curse. I propose before the end of next month that we have given Cassian Rookwood his life back. Agreed. She picked up the cold teapot. I am going to ask Madame Rosmerta for fresh, she said. Stay there, Harry. He stayed. He sat at the booth with the leather folder between his hands in the late afternoon light of a Hogsmeade January, and he watched the back of her bushy brown head go up to the bar, and he thought in the small, careful interior voice that was no longer his alone, the way it had not been alone since 1986, hello, the other side. She came back with the tea. She poured. She offered him the milk jug. He took it. He stirred. He drank. The tea was hot and good and faintly cardamom in a way the school did not, in its breakfast cups, ever serve. I have, she said, in the small, careful tone she had used in the booth all afternoon, one more thing. Yes, I am at 14 not a sentimental girl. I have not in my 14 years given my loyalty to many people. I have given it since November of first year to Ron with the smallness and slowness of a friendship that grew on its own. I am, on the Saturday in front of you, giving it to you. The conditions are the conditions. The conditions are non-negotiable, but the loyalty behind the conditions it is not conditional. I want you to understand that. The loyalty is given. The conditions describe its shape. They do not describe its existence. He looked at her for a long count. He set down the cup. Hermione, he said in the small voice of a 13-year-old who, for the first time in his life, had been spoken to in the cadence Rosa had once used to him over black beans in 1987. Thank you. You are welcome, Harry. She drank her tea. He drank his. Outside the 3 broomsticks the Hogsmeade snow had begun, very gently, to come down again. The lights along the high street had come on. Madame Rosmerta, at the bar, was polishing a glass with the small, patient indolence of a publican on a Saturday afternoon, and across the room a thin, black-haired man in a high-collared frock coat sat at the bar and read the Daily Prophet over a glass of mead, and did not, for the long course of 97 minutes plus tea, turn his head once toward the back booth. He had been reading the same column of the Prophet for 2 hours. He had heard, by the small, charmed listening rune he had set on the corner of the booth at 20 minutes past 11 that morning, 3 minutes before Hermione Granger had walked in, every word of the conversation. Severus Snape, on the Saturday in question, finished his mead at 6:15 p.m. He folded the Prophet. He set down a sickle. He nodded at Madame Rosmerta. He walked out of the 3 broomsticks into the snow. He walked in the small, even cadence of a man who had spent a career walking even cadences down the high street to the village edge. He took the back path up to the castle. He did not, on the path, change his pace. In his office, he locked the door. He drew the wards. He sat in his chair. He took out a small leather book of his own. He opened it to a page he had begun in November of 1991 and had added to, on average, twice a month in the small private hour after dawn when the locator had given him, week by week, the same green dot inside the castle. He read his own notes. He took up his quill. He wrote in his careful, contractionless hand 3 lines. The Granger child has signed on as auditor. The audit is, on the day's evidence, a good one. The boy is the boy his mother would, on close examination, have made. He is also the boy his godfather in the warehouse in Dorrell would have made. He is the joint product. He is unfinished, intelligent, dangerous, and on the day's evidence, the right side. I will not this winter raise an alarm. He set down the quill. He capped the inkwell. He stood up. He went down to supper. In the Gryffindor dormitory an hour later, Harry sat on the bed and folded the leather folder Hermione had given him into a charmed pouch under the mattress that Dexter had taught him at 10 to install in any bed he ever slept in. He took out from the same pouch the second notebook. He took out his quill. He opened the Hermione page. He wrote under the column he had begun 2 years earlier, trusted, conditional right arrow trusted, mutual. He capped the quill. He shut the notebook. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long, quiet moment, listening to the small, even breathing of his roommates around him. And he thought, in the careful interior cadence of a boy who had been raised by 2 fathers and a black beans Cuban grandmother and a heavy-bag boxing trainer, and was, on this Saturday, beginning to be raised by, in addition, the brightest witch of his year, the small, grateful thought of a person whose work, having been hidden for 7 years, was now in part shared. He lay back on the bed. He thought of Voldemort in the small, careful column on the right of the second notebook, in the page he had begun in Rose's kitchen in 1991, and had been adding to slowly and patiently ever since. He thought of Wiltshire. He thought of the marble mausoleum. He thought of June. He closed his eyes. He slept. She had begun the dossier in the second week of November 1992 on the train back from Hogsmeade Station after the 3rd weekend of her 2nd year. The dossier had begun on the first page with a single line of her round, even hand at the top of a blank parchment. I have this autumn noticed a small number of things that I cannot, on the evidence to date, explain. She had drawn, beneath the line, a careful 3-column table. The first column had been headed Observations. The second column had been headed Alternative Explanations. The third column had been headed Status. On the first page she had written in the Observations column the line, "In the autumn of 1991, Marshall the shopkeeper who had been in the village for 2 years vanished on the evening of a Hogsmeade weekend. HMP signed out at 4:11 p.m. and returned at 7:53 p.m. The Orrs closed the file. In the Alternative Explanations column she had written, "Drink, debts, an older feud, a private exit by flew to the continent." In the Status column she had written, "Unconvinced." She had spent over the next 12 months the slow, careful weekly hour of her Wednesday evening on the dossier. She had cross-referenced the Hogsmeade signing-out ledger against the Daily Prophet Missing Persons column. She had cross-referenced the Daily Prophet Missing Persons column against the small list of names she had pulled in the spring of 1992 from the Squibb bookseller's catalog at Coral Gables, by a private order placed through a French liaison at the British Library who had owed her father, a dentist, a long, careful favor from 1988. She had built, by the 3rd weekend of October 1993, a list of 3 names. The list had been Marshall Trapp Yaxley. She had built against the list a small, careful chart of Harry Morgan Potter's signing out times. The chart had not, on examination, balanced. She had not, on examination, panicked. She had been since June of 1991, the daughter of a dentist, when a small, careful chart did not balance, did not panic. The daughter of a dentist, when a small, careful chart did not balance, opened a fourth column. She had opened the fourth column on the Saturday of the third Hogsmeade weekend of October 1993, in the back stack of the library, in the small, careful, unsupervised 40-minute window that the dossier had by then become. The fourth column she had headed, "What I am, on the present evidence, prepared to do about this." On the first row of the fourth column she had written, beside the line on Marshall, "Nothing yet." On the second row she had written, beside the line on Trapp, "Nothing yet." On the third row she had written, beside the line on Yaxley, "Nothing yet." She had, beneath the 3 rows, drawn a small, careful horizontal line. Below the line she had written in her careful round hand the 4 words she had not, in 12 years of her own short, careful life, ever written before: "I am on the present evidence with him." She had underlined the 4 words. She had capped her quill. She had spent on the small, precise schedule of her Wednesday evenings, the next 8 Wednesdays, building, against the 4 words, a careful private list of conditions. The conditions had been, on the first draft, 21. By the 8th Wednesday they had been 5. By the 8th Wednesday she had decided that the meeting would, in the first week of January, take place, that the meeting would, on her side, be held in the small, grave, careful cadence of a junior auditor who had decided, before the audit, the disposition of the books, and that the meeting would, on the small, careful private accounting she had been keeping for 2.5 years, be the meeting in which she gave a person, for the first time in her short, careful life, her loyalty. The loyalty would be conditional. The conditions would be the 5. The loyalty itself, behind the conditions, would not. She had not slept the night before the meeting. She had lain in the bed in the third-year girls' dormitory at 2:30 with the parchment of the 5 conditions on her bedside table and the small wand-tip light of her own bedside lamp at its lowest setting, and had read, in the long, careful interior cadence she used for revision, the list one final time. She had thought twice about adding a 6th condition. The 6th condition had been, "Tell me you love me." She had not, on either of the 2 occasions, written the 6th condition down. She had decided, on a long count of careful consideration, that the 6th condition was not, in the small, careful private accounting of a meeting between auditors, an auditor's question to ask. She had folded the parchment. She had put it in the inside pocket of her cloak. She had slept in the end for 2 hours and 17 minutes. She had woken at 6:15. She had washed. She had dressed. She had braided her hair in a single careful French braid the way her mother had taught her at 6. She had gone down to breakfast and had eaten 2 slices of toast and a poached egg, and at 11:10 she had walked, in the small, even cadence she had practiced over the previous 8 Wednesdays, the long lane down to the 3 broomsticks. After the meeting, after the conversation, after the tea, in the slow walk back up the lane to the castle in the early evening of a Hogsmeade January, she had walked, for the first time in 3 years, beside a person whose interior cadence she did not, on the present accounting, need to predict. She had let her shoulder, on the long curve of the lane by the second bridge, lean briefly against his. He had not, by any visible signal, pulled away. They had walked the second half of the lane in a small, careful silence that was, on her own private accounting, the first time in her short, careful life she had not, at any point in a long walk with another person, felt the small, constant interior bell of "Am I, this evening, too much?" The interior bell had been silent. She had walked, in the small, even cadence of a 14-year-old who had, on the slow, careful Saturday of her own life, just signed her name on the work, beside the person who was now, by all the small conditions she had set on the page in the booth. Her work, too. In the entrance hall of the castle, at the bottom of the marble staircase, Ron had been waiting. He had been sitting on the bottom step with his Chudley cannon scarf wound twice around his neck and a small parchment bag of Honeyduke's chocolate frogs on his lap. He had been, on the small careful accounting Harry had been keeping of him since November of first year, exactly the person he had been on every other Saturday evening of the previous 2.5 years. "There you are," he had said. "Hello, Ron," Harry had said. "Where have you two been?" "The broomsticks," Hermione had said. "I had a long catch-up I had been meaning to have with Harry on the autumn revision schedule. He had a number of useful observations on the defense curriculum. I have taken extensive notes." "Brilliant," Ron had said. "Did you eat? Mum sent a fruitcake." "We ate," Harry had said in the small, careful cadence he had practiced for this exact reply. "I am, however, never opposed to fruitcake." "Excellent," Ron had said. They had gone up to the tower. In the common room, Ron had broken out the fruitcake and had distributed 3 uneven slices and had begun, with the small, unconscious enthusiasm of a person whom no one in his short, careful life had ever yet given a reason to be guarded, a long, animated description of his afternoon's Quidditch practice. Harry had listened. Hermione had listened. Both of them had, on the small private accounting they had begun in the booth that afternoon, listened to Ron with a new and careful attention. The attention of 2 auditors who had, that Saturday, decided that the third person in their friendship was the small, careful, intact thing they were, with the careful private work of their 2 lives, agreeing to keep intact. Ron had finished his story. Ron had eaten his slice. Ron had gone to bed at 11:30 with the small, even, untroubled yawn of a person whose Saturday had been, on the small, careful accounting of his own life, indistinguishable from every other Saturday of his year. Harry had watched him go up the dormitory stairs. He had, at the foot of the stairs, looked across at Hermione. She had looked back. They had not spoken. They had not needed to. The third condition had been the third condition. Ron was the intact thing. Up in the astronomy tower an hour later, alone, with the small charmed star map open on the parapet in front of him and the careful black sky of a clear Hogsmeade January night above him, Harry had taken out the second notebook. He had opened it to the page he had begun 3 years earlier, in Rose's kitchen in Miami, on the largest name on the British list. He had read the page, slowly, beginning to end. He had written beneath the final entry of the autumn in a small, careful new hand he had taught himself for the page that night, 4 lines. The 4 lines had been, "The auditor is in. The audit is mine. The list on the audit holds. The largest piece of work remains." He had set down the quill. He had looked for a long, careful count at the cold stars of the January sky. He had thought, in the careful, unspoken cadence he had been taught at 6 on the porch in Miami, the slow, patient interior sentence he had been practicing, since the 1st November of his first year, for the long, careful work that lay ahead. The interior sentence had been, "I am," on the small, careful accounting of 2 careful fathers and a black beans Cuban grandmother and a heavy-bag boxing trainer, and now the brightest auditor of my year, the person who, in the small, careful June of my 14th year, will end this. He had nodded once neutrally to the cold January sky. He had capped the quill. He had gone down to bed. In the back stack of the library on the first Sunday after the meeting, with 2 cups of cocoa from the kitchens and the small, careful working dossier on the desk between them, they had set down the audit calendar. The audit calendar had been Hermione's. She had drawn it in 3 colors on a folded sheet of parchment she had taken from her own revision file: blue for verification, green for clearance, red for hold. Every name in the second notebook had a row. Every row had a date. Every date had a column for the small, careful evidence she would, in the course of the week, gather. Every column had a small empty box for her sign. He had looked at the calendar for a long count. "You have been," he said, "preparing this for some time. Since the autumn of 1992, before you had decided what to do with me." "Yes, you decided what to do with me in the autumn of 1992. I decided what to do with whatever you were in the autumn of 1992. The exact what was not, until the autumn of 1993, the question. The exact what became the question when you stood at the window of the surgery and cast the leveret counterincantation at a man on the floor of a consulting room. The exact what before that was, on my private accounting, an open file. And after that I knew that, whatever you were a person who had, on at least one Saturday, used a wand at 30 paces to give a man back his life. I had, by then, the evidence in the dossier. I had the evidence at the window. I had the evidence of you on the bench by the lake on the Tuesday after the surgery. I had, on the careful sum of the 3 pieces of evidence, a person I had decided in my own private accounting to back." He had looked at her for a long count. "Hermione." "Yes. In the small careful auditor's cadence I am, this Sunday, asking you a question with the small careful precision you would, in my place, ask one. What was the small precise evidence on the bench by the lake?" She had been silent for a long count. She had set down her cocoa. "You were on the bench by the lake at 4:30 on the Tuesday after the surgery. You were not on observation, eating the apple you had taken from the great hall at lunch. You were holding the apple in your right hand. You were, in your left, holding a small folded square of paper. The folded square was the asterisk page of your second notebook. I had, in the previous fortnight, identified the structure of the second notebook by means of 3 of your discarded library reservation slips. I had, in the previous week, identified the asterisk page by means of one of your discarded inkblot tests. I did not, on the Tuesday by the lake, read the page. I read your face. You looked on the bench. For the first time in the 4 months I had been watching you, like a person who had, on his own free assessment, declined a piece of work. He had been silent for a long count. You read my face. I read your face. And you decided on the reading of my face that I was the kind of person you would back. I decided on the reading of your face that the asterisk page was the most important page in the second notebook. The audit followed." He had looked at her for a long count. "Hermione." "Yes, thank you. You are welcome, Harry." She had picked up her cocoa. She had blown gently on the surface of it. She had drunk. He had picked up his. They had, on the small, careful Sunday evening cadence of the back stack of the library, gone, name by name and column by column, through the second notebook. By 10:30 the calendar had been signed in 3 colors. By 11 they had agreed the order of the spring's work. By 11:15 they had finished the cocoa. She had stood up. She had folded the calendar. "Same time next Sunday. Same time. Good night, Harry. Good night, Hermione." She had walked, in the small even cadence of an auditor whose first audit was, on the day's evidence, complete, out of the back stack. He had stayed for a long, careful count. He had looked at the small, empty cocoa cup on the desk. He had not named what he felt. He had named only what he saw. He had seen, on the desk, the small light steam still rising from the cup, the small folded parchment of the calendar, neatly folded into thirds, the careful round handwriting of the auditor on the spine of the working dossier, the small careful 3-colored weight of a piece of work that had, after 7 years of being his alone, become, on the small careful private accounting of the back stack of the library, a piece of work that was, from this evening, no longer his alone. He had stood up. He had taken the cups to the kitchens. He had gone up to bed. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, The Ritual. He had bought the gardener's bothy at the south edge of the little Hangleton churchyard, from a wizarding land agent in Diagon Alley in the last week of October of his 4th year. under the name of a man named Hadrian Marsh, who had died on St. Kitts in 1979, and whose paperwork Dexter had been keeping warm in a Coral Gables safe deposit box for 14 years. The bothy had cost him 44 galleons, of which Dexter had wired 42. The bothy had a stone roof, a tin chimney, a single door that had once been red and was now black, and an unbroken sightline through the lich gate to the marble mausoleum of the Riddle family, in which, on the night he had chosen, on the date the small, careful work of 3 years would conclude, the ritual would be done. He had been at the bothy 17 times between October and June. He had not on any visit been seen by a muggle. He had not on any visit been seen by a witch. Hermione had been with him on 4 of them, twice in February, once in April, once in May, to verify, with her own eyes and her own wand, the perimeter, the sight lines, the sound dispersion of the silencing rune he had set on the iron gate of the family plot, and the small charmed underlay of the floor of the bothy itself, on which, since March, a careful layer of high-mill muggle plastic sheeting had been pinned down with industrial staples. The plastic was the color of a winter sky. The plastic was, in the early afternoon light through the bothy's single low window, almost gray. He stood in the bothy on the 24th of June, at 6 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, with the goblet of fire's third task portkey still warm in his coat pocket from the touch of the maize hedge 11 minutes earlier, and he laid the small leather kit on the wooden table by the door for the last time. Inside the kit, there were 3 knives. One was the lightest of his Miami knives, the same one he had carried in November of 1991. One was a longer, heavier one Dexter had sent him at 12 for the Mulciber kill, and had been used since, on every name on the second notebook. The third was a small, thin one of his own, bought from a Hogsmeade smith on a Saturday in March, that he had not until tonight used. He laid them in order on the table. He took out the second notebook. He opened it to the Pettigrew page. He read the page once slowly, beginning to end. He read the page on the second notebook for Barty Crouch Jr. He read the page for Riddle Tom Marvolo, which had grown over the 3 years to 14 pages, and which carried on the inside margin of every other page, in the small, careful column on the right that he had given a name to at 13, the same single word. The word was guilty. He closed the notebook. He set it on the table beside the knives. He took out from his coat a sealed envelope addressed in his hand to Dexter Morgan, C.O. the Indian Creek Safe House, Miami Beach, Florida. He took out from the inner pocket a second sealed envelope addressed in his hand to Miss Hermione Granger, Gryffindor Tower, Hogwarts. He laid them in order on the table. He took out, finally, a small black and white photograph he had carried since 1986, a snapshot of Lily Evans Potter at 18, laughing in a Hampstead Heath autumn, taken by James Potter on a Polaroid he had not lived to develop properly. He laid it on the corner of the table, propped against the smaller knife, facing the door. He breathed. He waited. Pettigrew arrived at 6:12. He had apparated, by the small splinching crack the silencing rune did not quite catch, into the lee of the lich gate. He carried in his arms a bundle the size of a 6-month-old child, wrapped in a black wool blanket. He was, in profile, exactly what the journals had described, a small, round-shouldered man with a wet front lip and a thinning patch on the crown, and Harry, watching through the bothy's low window, identified him in the cadence of a man verifying a face for the last time. Crouch came in at 6:14 by the upper path. He carried a long, polished wand and a small leather satchel and an expression Harry recognized, from the squib clippings on the trial of 1981, as the calm, specific patience of a true believer. Harry, in the bothy, drew his wand and the longer knife. He did not, in the small, careful interior cadence of a craftsman, hurry. He waited until they had reached the cauldron. The cauldron had been set by Pettigrew, in the center of the graveled walk between the mausoleum door and the lich gate. On the precise patch of gravel Harry had marked, in March, with 3 small white pebbles arranged in the shape of an inverted triangle that the 2 adults arriving at the graveyard would, on any plausible inspection, identify as a piece of old churchyard litter and not as a kill mark. Pettigrew set the bundle down on a stone bench. He unwrapped it. What lay inside the blanket was a fetal thing, small and red, with a face that had not yet finished being a face. The thing made a noise. The noise was a noise. Harry filed it neutrally, as he had filed the noise of every subject in 7 years of work, and he did not, on the file, write the word that the noise made him want to write. He stepped, very quietly, out of the bothy. He cast, in the careful muttered cadence Hermione, and he had rehearsed every Sunday evening since January, the long compound silencing ward she had perfected for him over the spring. The ward spread, very softly, in a dome 30 feet across, and settled. Pettigrew and Crouch at the cauldron did not turn. The fetal thing in the blanket did not turn. He walked, in the small even cadence he had been taught at 8 on the South Beach bench, to the lich gate. He set the lich gate's wards down with the silencing rune he had set in October. He stepped through. He stood at the bottom of the gravel path. He said in a voice that did not lift but reached, easily in the dome, the small distance to the cauldron, "Mr. Pettigrew, Mr. Crouch." They turned. Pettigrew, who had spent 12 years as a rat in a child's bedroom, saw the boy at the lich gate and made a small wet noise that began as a question and finished, in its second syllable, as a recognition. Crouch, who had spent 10 years in a basement and 3 years at large, looked at the boy with the cold, incurious gaze of a man who had been told, on his first morning in the field, never to be surprised in front of his master. The fetal thing on the bench did not turn its head. It said, in the imperious sibilant register Harry had read about in 7 different memoirs and 3 sworn depositions, the cadence he had memorized at 12, by reading the words aloud on the porch with the wisteria moving in the background, the single word, "Wormtail." Pettigrew, who at the sound of the word had begun, by long instinct to obey, lifted his wand. Harry, in the careful interior cadence of a craftsman who had been preparing for this small specific minute for 13 of the 14 years of his life, said, "Stupefy." The wand light caught Pettigrew square in the breastbone. The small wet man folded onto the gravel. His wand fell with him. Harry summoned it neatly across the path with a soft, non-verbal accio and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. Crouch had already begun his own movement. He had a half-second. He was, by every report, fast. Harry had a quarter-second. He was, by every measure, faster. Expelliarmus. The U-wand came up the gravel into Harry's left hand. Harry pocketed it. Petrificus totalis. Crouch went down full length on the gravel, with a small soft sound and the wide, unblinking gaze of a man whose long, careful career had just become, by an act of his own, a piece of historical record. The fetal thing on the bench, in the precise silence that followed, was the only sound in the dome. It made the noise again. It said in the same imperious sibilant register, who has come? Wormtail, who is on the path?" Harry walked in his small, even cadence up the gravel. He stopped at the bench. He looked down at the thing. He did not, for a long count of 3, speak. Then he said, in the voice he had been practicing, on the porch in Miami in the summer between 3rd and 4th year, every morning of August, for this single minute of his life, "My name is Harry Morganpotter. You knew me in 1981 as the boy on the floor of the nursery at Godric's Hollow. You have, since 1981, been waiting to finish what you did not, in 1981, finish. You are, by the careful private accounting of a man who taught me at 6 to verify, the 9th name on a list of 41 I have been working on since 1988. You are, by the careful private accounting of his friend who audits me, the same. You are guilty of the deaths of, by my count to the second decimal, 208 people. You are not on the count, the largest entry. You are on the small column on the right that my father taught me to weigh, the heaviest. You hesitated. You hesitated 3 times in 1981 in front of 3 different witnesses, and you finished the work anyway. The thing on the bench did not move. Harry knelt very precisely on the gravel beside the bench. He did not draw the longer knife. He did not need it for the thing on the bench. He drew instead the smallest of the 3, the thin one, the new one, the one he had bought from the Hogsmeade smith in March and had not in 3 months used. The blade was 4.5 inches long. It was very sharp. He held it in the small, even cadence of a man finishing a piece of work, 6 inches above the small chest of the thing. You are, he said, the last name on the active list this year. There will, after tonight, be others I will spend on the present count, the rest of my 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th years on the remaining 32. But you are, on the count of work, on the count of years, on the count of every page in the second notebook. The one who has, by every measure, been waiting for me. I have, since the autumn of 1991, been waiting for you. I have been, since 1988, the small, careful work of 2 careful fathers and 1 careful Cuban grandmother. I have, in the cadence the first one taught me, verified you twice. I have, in the cadence the second one taught me, signed you. I have, in the third cadence, in the voice that taught me at 13 to stand down when the room argued, listened, all spring, for the argument. He waited a long count. The thing on the bench made a small noise. It was not, on any reasonable taxonomy, an argument. It was, by every measure Harry had learned to take in 7 years, a snarl. All right, Harry said. He brought the blade down. In the precise short clinical arc Bobby Hampton had taught him for a body shot at the heavy bag, the same arc, the same elbow position, the same small, even compression of the diaphragm, and the thing on the bench, which had spent 11 years half existing in a forest in Albania, and 3 years building itself by inches back toward a body, was in 3 seconds gone. There was very little blood. The thing had not yet made the kind of blood a body made. What there was, Harry caught on a folded square of the same high-mill plastic he had laid in the bothy in March. He folded the plastic. He folded it again. He set it neatly on the bench beside the small empty blanket. The silence in the dome was the silence of a room in which the long argument is over. Crouch went second. Harry did not, with Crouch, draw a knife. He did not need to. Crouch had, by his presence at the ritual and his 11 years of escape, and his 3 years of meticulous imperious and polyjuice work against a sitting minister's family, signed himself onto the page in a column so heavy it required only the smallest, neatest finish. Harry performed the finish with the lightest of the 3 knives, on the gravel, in the same small, even cadence, in less than a minute. He folded the gravel sheet of plastic. He set it on the bench. Pettigrew went third. Pettigrew, when Harry took the body bind off, blinked twice and looked up at the boy at the bench and said, in the small, wet, whining cadence that had in 1981 talked Sirius Black into a midnight passage that had ended in 12 years of innocent imprisonment, Harry, Harry, James's boy, Harry, please, please, I was made to. I have been under everything, please. I have always been on your side. I knew your father, I knew your mother. Harry knelt. He held the small Hogsmeade knife in his right hand. He held in his left the second notebook, open at the Pettigrew page. He read, aloud, in the small, even cadence of a man for whom the work was the work, and not the pleasure and not the revenge, the page he had compiled, over 3 years, on the man at his feet. He read the betrayal at Godric's Hollow. He read the murder of the 12 muggles in the street. He read the framing of Sirius Black. He read the 12 years of hiding in a child's bedroom in the Borough as the family rat. He read the column on the right. Hesitated 1979, did not hesitate 1981, turned twice in 12 hidden years, and on both occasions reaffirmed his allegiance under no duress whatever. He shut the notebook. He said, in the voice Harry Morgan, dead now for 13 years, had taught him to use when reading the last sentence of any verification, "You are signed." Pettigrew said, in the small, wet voice that did not by any measure argue please. Harry, who had at 13 learned that the rule that cost was the rule that you stood down when the room argued and the rule that you proceeded when it did not proceeded. It took 11 seconds. He folded the third sheet of plastic. He set it on the bench. The dome had been silent for 1 minute and 47 seconds when Harry stood at the bench and looked at the 3 folded sheets. He breathed in. He breathed out. He did not name what he felt. He named only what he saw. He took the small, thin knife. He cleaned it. He put it back in the kit. He took the longer knife. He cleaned it. He put it back in the kit. He took the lightest of the 3. He cleaned it. He put it back in the kit. He went to the bothy. He took the 3 folded sheets with him. He took the bundle. He took the small black blanket. He took both of the wands. He took the photograph of his mother off the table. He kissed it once, on the surface of the Polaroid, in the small private cadence of a 13-year-old who had been 10 when he had first learned what she had looked like. He put it back in the inner pocket. He brought out from the bothy stove the small Muggle incinerator he had charmed in November to burn at 1200 degrees. He set the bundle inside. He set the small empty blanket. He set the 3 sheets of plastic. He set the wands. He set into a separate compartment every fiber and trace and contact item from every surface in the dome. He started the incinerator. It ran, in the careful, even pattern of a Muggle furnace running on a charmed wood pellet, for 14 minutes. He sat on the bothy's small wooden chair and watched the small, high orange flame, and he thought, for the long count of 14 minutes, of the porch at Indian Creek, and of Rosa, and of the wisteria, and of the day on the Surrey hallway carpet at 4:48 in the morning when a man had held out a hand and a small green-eyed boy had taken it. When the incinerator finished, the contents were ash. He scattered the ash, with the small reverence of a man returning a difficult thing to the earth that had no further claim on it, over the Riddle family plot. He took down the silencing dome with the small wand flick Hermione had taught him in February. He set the Lichgate's wards back exactly as he had set them in October. He walked out of the churchyard. He stood for a long moment at the verge of the lane. He took out his wand. He cast the small apparition focus he had been taught, illegally, by a French liaison of Dexter's the previous summer. The lane folded around him. He arrived in the small, even cadence he had been taught at 6, at the south edge of the maze on the Hogwarts Quidditch lawn, 18 seconds after the portkey ought, by every reasonable timeline, to have brought him back from the center of the maze with the Triwizard Cup. He set down the cup. He sat down beside it. He waited for the noise of the crowd to reach him. He let his shoulders fall very slightly into the small, careful slump of a 14-year-old who had touched a portkey in a maze and had been taken somewhere he had not expected to go and had come back, panting, unhurt, with the cup. Dumbledore reached him first. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Harry, are you all right? Harry, speak to me. Where did the cup take you?" Harry looked up. He looked at Albus Dumbledore in the careful, small, evaluating cadence of a 14-year-old who had, on the porch in Miami, been taught for 7 years to weigh every adult he met against the column on the right. "Sir," he said, in the voice he had been practicing on the porch every morning of August for the small minute in which Dumbledore would, after the fact, ask him this question. "The cup was a portkey. It took me to a graveyard in Wiltshire. There were 2 men there. One was Peter Pettigrew. He was alive. The other was Barty Crouch Jr., who is, on the evidence of my eyes and the testimony of the wand I am about to give you, also alive. They were attempting to perform a resurrection ritual on what I am told, On subsequent reading of the diary they had with them and the materials I have brought back, was a small surviving body of the Dark Lord. Sir, I was outnumbered. I am, however, 14, and I have read a number of books, and I was by luck able to disable Pettigrew with a stunning spell and Crouch with a disarm. I bound them both. I brought the materials back to you. They are, I believe, still bound. There is a small bothy at the south edge of the churchyard that, when I left, contained Mr. Pettigrew, Mr. Crouch, and the small surviving body, all three of them disarmed and bound, and on my own non-medical evaluation, alive. He took from his coat Pettigrew's wand. He held it out to Dumbledore. He took from his coat Crouch's wand. He held that out also. Dumbledore took both wands. Dumbledore did not, for a long count, speak. "Harry," he said, in the slow, gentle, careful cadence of a man whose entire long, careful career had just been, by an act of a 14-year-old he had not since 1986 accurately located on any of his maps, set onto a new course. "We will, I think, send the Aurors to Wiltshire at once." "Yes, sir. And you and I will, perhaps, have a conversation in due course about how, exactly, you happen to know to bring the silencing materials in the bothy." "Yes, sir," Harry said. "We can have that conversation in due course." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long moment. In due course, Dumbledore said, he let it be. The Aurors arrived in Little Hangleton at 8:07 that evening, and did not, in the bothy at the south edge of the churchyard, find Mr. Pettigrew, Mr. Crouch, or the small surviving body of the Dark Lord. They found, instead, a clean stone floor, a small wooden table, a stove with a fire long gone out, and on the table a single sealed envelope addressed in a child's careful hand to A.P.W.B. Dumbledore. The envelope contained, on a single sheet of paper in the same careful hand, 3 lines. "I am sorry, sir." The 3 subjects were code subjects of mine, and I have, since 1988, dealt with my code subjects myself. The materials, the wands, and the small surviving body have, on the evening's accounting, been disposed of. The Dark Lord is, by my professional assessment, finally dead. Harry Morganpotter, 4th year, Gryffindor. Dumbledore, in his office at 9:43, read the letter twice. He set it down on his desk. He sat for a long minute in the small, grandfatherly silence of a man who had, by gentle inaction and the small, steady avoidance of one particular street in one particular Surrey suburb, lost the only piece of work he had ever truly intended to do. He picked up his cocoa. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. At 10:10 the same evening, in the back booth of the Three Broomsticks, Harry Morganpotter, in a clean school robe, with his hair still damp from the prefect bathroom and the small lavender shampoo, sat opposite Hermione Granger and drank a pot of fresh cardamom tea. She had ordered shortbread. He took a piece. "Was it done?" she said in the small, even cadence of an auditor. "It was done. All three. By the code. By the code." The voices did not, at any point in the 7 minutes the dome was up, raise an objection. The small column on the right held for all 3. Pettigrew tried to argue. He did not, on any reasonable accounting of the page, have the materials to argue with. "Did you make any mistake?" he thought for a long count. "I left the Polaroid of my mother on the table in the bothy. I retrieved it. I kissed it. It is in my coat. I have brought it back." "That is not a mistake, Harry." "No," he said, "I think it is not." She poured him more tea. He drank. Outside the Three Broomsticks, the summer evening of his 14th year was easing toward dusk, and the long warm air had the small fat smell of Hogsmeade June. And across the room, Madame Rosmerta was polishing a glass with the small patient indolence of a publican on a Friday evening. And a thin black-haired man in a high-collared frock coat sat at the bar with a glass of mead and did not, this time, set a charmed listening rune on the corner of the booth, because he had decided over the spring that the booth's audit was no longer, by any reasonable accounting of his own private rules, the kind of audit he was entitled to do. Severus Snape on the evening in question finished his mead at 10:40. He folded his prophet. He set down a sickle. He nodded at Madame Rosmerta. He walked out of the Three Broomsticks into the warm summer dark. In his office, an hour later, he sat at his desk, took out his small leather book, opened it to the page on the boy, and wrote in his careful, contractionless hand, beneath the last entry of the spring, 3 lines. The work is done. The boy is, on the evening's accounting, a more useful instrument of justice than the institution that should have produced him. I do not, in the small private accounting I keep, regret my silence. I will henceforth not write further in this book. He closed the book. He locked it in the drawer. He went, in the small even cadence of a man who had spent a long career walking even cadences, to sleep. In the back booth of the Three Broomsticks, Harry watched Hermione finish her tea and reach across the table for his hand. He gave her his hand. She held it on the table the way she had held it in January, in the same booth, on the Saturday when she had given him her loyalty with the conditions that had, in the event, kept him whole. "Are you all right, Harry?" she said, in the careful small voice of an auditor who was, in addition, a friend. "Yes," he said, "I am all right. Will you come back to the castle now?" "Yes." He stood up. He paid for the tea. He hung up Madame Rosmerta's small cardamom-stained tea cozy on its hook by the door. He put on his cloak. He walked with Hermione out into the warm June dark, and they took the long lane up to the castle in the small even cadence of 2 14-year-olds with a long, careful summer ahead of them, and a small, careful list of work still to do, and one large piece of work entirely and definitively done. In Miami on the same evening, a man in his middle 40s sat on the porch of a stilted clapboard safe house 2 streets back from the Indian Creek and read, in the late afternoon Florida light, by the small clear envelope an owl had dropped on his porch table an hour earlier, 3 lines in his son's careful hand. The letter said, "Dad, the largest piece of work is done. I am all right. I am with Hermione. I am drinking tea. I love you, kid." Dexter Morgan, who had not in 15 years of correspondence cried, sat on the porch in the small, even Atlantic breeze of a Florida June and did not cry. He did, however, smile. He folded the letter. He put it in his shirt pocket. He poured himself a small whiskey from the bottle Rosa had given him in 1986 and had been telling him for a decade to save for an occasion of his choosing. He raised the glass neutrally to the seawall. "To the kid," he said. The pelican on the seawall, which had been there in 1986 and was, on the evening in question, the great-grandson of the pelican that had been there in 1986, tucked its wings and did not look up. The Atlantic moved against the pilings in the broad, even slap of a tide that did not care, had never cared, what was finishing in the small clapboard kitchen above it. Dexter Morgan drank the whiskey. He sat on the porch. He waited for the next letter. He had begun the preparation of the little Hangleton site in the last week of October. The Goblet of Fire had selected him, on the night of the All Hallows Feast, as the 4th champion. The hall had erupted. The Slytherin table had jeered. The Hufflepuffs had been merciful. Ron, for the first time in 3 years, had been, on the small, careful accounting Harry had been keeping of him, briefly hurt. Hermione had looked across the staff table at Harry with the small, precise auditor's gaze of a person who had, on the same afternoon, read the regulations of the tournament in the library, and had identified, in the careful small print of Article XII, the small concealed clause that bound the champion to the tournament's end. She had nodded once, neutrally, across the room. The nod had meant, on the small, careful private cadence the two of them had perfected over the previous 9 months, "We will, in our private accounting, find the cover useful." The cover had been useful. The tournament had given him, in the autumn of his 14th year, the perfect cover for the long, careful work he had been planning since the spring of 1993. The tournament had given him a public excuse for hours of unsupervised research in the library, a public excuse for long weekends in Hogsmeade and farther afield, a public excuse for the small private mail he had been sending, in the second week of October, to the Diagon Alley land agent under the name of Hadrian Marsh, a public excuse for the small, careful daily apparition practice he had been doing, in the disused Charms classroom on the 7th floor at 6:15 a.m., with the small charmed teaching wand Dexter's French liaison had sent him in the August courier bag. He had bought the bothy on the last Friday of October. He had walked the perimeter of the Riddle graveyard on the first Saturday of November. He had set, on the second Saturday, the silencing rune on the iron gate of the family plot. He had begun, on the third Saturday, the slow, careful weekly construction of the kill room. He had not, in any of the 17 visits, used a wand to do the assembly. He had used, in the small, careful Muggle cadence Dexter had taught him at 8, his own hands. He had unrolled the high mill plastic on the floor of the bothy with the small, careful precision of a man laying a carpet. He had stapled it down with a Muggle industrial stapler he had bought at a hardware merchant in Norwich. He had run, around the perimeter of the bothy, a small, careful Muggle copper wire that, when he was ready in June to charge it, would carry, from a small lead-acid battery he had hidden in the bothy's chimney, the same low, even amperage that the small, charmed silencing dome he had practiced with Hermione would carry around the cauldron in the open air at the same time. The redundancy was deliberate. The first father had taught him, on the porch in Miami in 1988, that the work was the work. The second father, in his small, accurate ghost voice, had taught him, in the small night hours of November 1992, that the work without redundancy was not, on close examination, the work. And the auditor, in the careful weekly Wednesday evening reviews in the back stack of the library, had taught him, in the spring and autumn of 1993, that any plan that had not survived 3 independent failure modes was not, on her small, careful accounting, a plan she would, on the day, sign. The plan had, by the third Saturday in May, survived 4. The 3 letters on the bothy table on the evening of the 24th of June had not been the only letters in the bothy. There had been a 4th. The 4th had been a small folded square of paper in the careful round hand of Hermione Granger that she had given him on the morning of the 3rd task, in the great hall, in the small, careful, private gesture of a person handing a friend a charm for luck. He had unfolded it in the bothy before he had laid out the knives. He had read it once. He had folded it again. He had put it in the inner pocket of his coat, against his ribs, beside the small Polaroid of his mother. The note had said, in her careful round hand, "The list on my audit holds. The man at the cauldron is on the list. The work is by my sign the work. Come back. Tea at the Broomsticks, 10 p.m. He had not in the bothy named what he had felt on reading it. He had named only what he had seen. He had seen on his own ribs the small careful weight of 2 pieces of paper, one a photograph of a laughing woman in a Hampstead autumn, one a small folded square in the hand of a friend. He had set down the knives. He had waited. After the work, after the incinerator, after the small scattered ash on the Riddle family plot, after the long, careful return apparition to the south edge of the maze on the Hogwarts Quidditch lawn, he had stood, in the small, even cadence he had been taught to use on porches in 1986, at the verge of the maze, and had listened, for a long count, to the small, distant noise of the crowd as it began to register that one of the 4 champions had, at last, come back. He had let himself, for a long count of 3, feel the small interior bell. The bell had been quiet. The bell had been, on the small, careful accounting he had been keeping since 6, satisfied. He had nodded once neutrally to the dark. He had set down the Triwizard Cup. He had sat down on the grass beside it. He had waited for Dumbledore. Chapter 6 End.